Chapter 333. What the Azure Dragon looks like depends on the chi around it. When the Azure Dragon was trapped at the bottom of the lake, it was because of the auspicious chi in the White Academy that allowed it to maintain its nature. As long as the auspicious chi in the White Academy is destroyed, the Azure Dragon will be demonized and be used by me. The demon-transforming beast's eyes lit up. Master has a way. I'll go and tell the bone-eroding beast now. The man nodded. The corner of his mouth slowly curved up, bringing out a never-before-seen evil aura. It's time for the world ruled by humans to come to an end. Pitter-patter. The night rain droplets fell on the wide leaves. When Hellion Wei Wei woke up, she subconsciously tugged at her locked left hand. Then she looked at the man lying next to her. Only then did she realize that her clothes had been changed. Her stomach no longer hurt, and she felt indescribably comfortable. He slept for a very long time. She licked her lips and wanted to drink water. While she was deep in thought, Bailey Jiaju woke up. He glanced at her faintly, then took the porcelain cup and brought it to her lips. That tone was no different from keeping a pet. Hellion Vivian thought for a while. She moved her fingers and unlocked herself first. Then she drank the cup of water under Beligaju's slightly cold gaze. After she finished drinking, she locked herself in again. She was so obedient that she couldn't be any more obedient. As expected, the royal was very satisfied with her behavior. He helped her comb her long hair with his fingers, hugged her and closed his eyes. Hellion Vivian's current mood was really hard to describe. Unfortunately, Yuan Ming still jumped out to stir up trouble. That devilish tone of his was not just a little bit. In any case, he likes you a little bit. You might as well pounce on him. What is more important than cultivation? Truly a foolish woman. Shut up. Hellion Vivian only gave Yuan Ming 3 words. Yuan Ming hooked his thin lips carelessly. Even if you don't pounce on him now, you still have 8 days at most. What are you hesitating for? Do you want me to burn you, Hellion Vivian's tone carried a hint of threat. Yuan Ming snorted twice. I won't say anymore, I won't say anymore. 8 days, you remember 8 days. Hellion Wei Wei had a bit of a headache, so she simply cut off the telepathic communication with Yuan Ming. When she raised her eyes, she discovered that Bailey Jiaju was looking at her. His thin lips even carried a bit of devilishness as he said, "If you had always been so obedient, I wouldn't have gotten angry." Lock himself up? Was this considered obedient? Sure enough, that was what His Highness was thinking. So, she went to the bathroom. Hellion Vivian unlocked herself and locked herself up again. She was so familiar with it that she couldn't be more familiar with it. So when the little 7th prince came over, he was a little confused about what was going on. Because this was the first time he had seen someone who was willing to lock themselves up. So she instinctively asked Beligaju, "Third brother, what is third sister-in-law doing?" "Your third sister-in-law likes to play role-play." Beligaju leisurely crossed his legs and put his arms behind his head. His tone was cold and there wasn't a trace of change in it, as if he was just stating a fact. The little 7th prince already understood what role-play meant. This was all thanks to His Highness' special education. So when he said these words, he glanced at Hellion Vivian. "So third sister-in-law likes this." Hellion Vivian. Who is this person who likes to play role-play? Yes. Beligaju had already answered for her. The little 7th prince tilted his head and thought for a moment, then said, "But I want to eat snake meat. I've already put the snake head at the door." "Third sister-in-law, don't you know how to cook? Let third sister-in-law roast it for me." "Do you think your third sister-in-law is a chef?" Beligaju glanced at him, "And only pigs like to eat snakes." The dignified little 7th prince hesitated for a moment and said, "I just took the snake head to feed the pig, but the pig didn't eat it and kept trembling." "Why are you feeding the pig snake?" Beligaju raised an eyebrow. The little 7th prince was very domineering, "To fatten it up and eat it. The pig won't eat anything you feed it because it already knows what you're trying to do," Beligaju said as he adjusted his sleeves. The little 7th prince frowned, "Then I'll hide in a corner and secretly feed it in the future." Hellion Vivian. So this was how His Highness usually tricked children. The pig was obviously scared by the snake head. What did he mean by knowing what little 7th prince was trying to do? "Then can I ask third sister-in-law to roast the snake for me first? After that I'll go feed the pig." Obviously, Beligaju underestimated his little brother's obsession with food. He glanced at the little one again, Sure. After getting Beligaju's approval, the little one was very happy. He strode with his short legs and wanted to carry the snake head in. Beligaju continued, but you have to dance first. Hearing this, the little one's back shook and he subconsciously covered his little butt with his hands. That action was so cute that Hellion Vivian couldn't help but laugh out loud. There's no need to dance. But isn't the snake a demonic beast? Will it be bad to eat it? Hellion Vivian only knew that if it was a spirit beast, it might be helpful for cultivation. However, only people who were evil cultivators could eat it. If it was a demonic beast, wouldn't it be more disadvantageous? The little one put on a serious face. I can eat anything. Hellion Vivian facepalmed. I know you're a foodie. She never doubted Little Seventh's ability to eat. What she considered was the consequences. It's okay, Beligaju spoke at this time and his voice was calm. He can digest anything. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. What is his stomach made of? Beligaju didn't say anything. The little one took out a meat bun from his pocket and said, I'll eat this first. As he ate, he seemed to have thought of something and said fiercely, Oh right, when the dean gave me the meat bun, he wanted me to tell third sister-in-law that he's going to announce the content of the third test. You should tell her first. Hellion Vivian felt defeated for the first time. But the lock on her hand? Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju again. I'll be back in a while. Beligaju's eyes were cold, but he didn't agree. Hellion Vivian smiled. She felt that he was like a noble and lazy Persian cat. She couldn't go wrong by stroking his fur. Thus, she turned her face to the side and kissed him on the forehead with a slight smile on her lips. Beligaju's fingers froze. Before he could react, the person beside him was gone. Hellion Vivian didn't stay for long. She carried Little Seventh Prince and rushed to the underground palace. Bailey Jiaju furrowed his long eyebrows. After that, he suddenly leaped up and stood up. His slender fingers fell on the area that Wei Wei had just touched. Probably because they were very confident in themselves, the two people looked at each other, then looked at Yun Biluo. Yun Biluo expressed that she had no problem with it. Hellion Vivian naturally did not say anything, she just listened quietly. If the other party was Murong Hongtu, there was one thing that they had to pay attention to. It was unknown if it was because he had done too many bad things, but he would always bring a group of experts with him when he went out. In order to get information from Murong Hongtu without making a sound, the first thing they had to deal with was this group of experts. You can choose your favorite martial practice and outfit. I don't care what method you use to get close to him, my only request is to keep this test a secret. At the same time, when Tu Su Feng finished speaking, everyone had quickly chosen their own equipment. They stood in a straight line in front of Tu Su Feng. It was not difficult for Tu Su Feng to get the invitation to the auction. However, they could not enter as students of the White Academy. This operation was undoubtedly more difficult to deal with than the one-on-one tests. Not only did it require the cooperation of the team, but it also required the individual's ability to stand out in the team. It was simply too difficult. Moreover, the two young masters of the four influential families obviously only knew the theory but had never put it into practice. After taking the task, they began to arrange the members. Logically speaking, their method of seduction was not bad. Yun Biluo's appearance was enough to attract Murong Hongtu's attention. However, they arranged Hellion Vivian, who had performed the best during this period, to be in the corner and let Hellion Vivian be the lookout. Yuan Ming sneered, "These people are doing this on purpose. You have already won twice, so they simply don't want you to have a chance to perform in this test. This kind of method is really somewhat unpresentable." Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and tidied up her waiter outfit, her expression indifferent. Things won't go according to their plan. The seduction won't have much effect on Murong Hongtu. I saw you nodding just now, so I thought you agreed with their plan. Xiao Bai also spoke, her voice was cold. Hellion Wei Wei stood up straight. I did agree, but as a person you should always have a backup plan. They had to make a move on a person. They had to figure out what this person was interested in before they could have a chance to get close to him. This was the most important step in Hellion Vivian's opinion. However, these people had omitted this step. However, for Yun Biluo and the other two young masters who had been Deadpool, they more or less understood Murong Hongtu. At least compared to Han Yu and Shao Qi, they had a relative advantage. The auction was organized by the city master of Armament City, so of course, it was up to Han Yu to arrange how to secretly enter the auction. In fact, they did not need Hellion Vivian to sneak into the auction as a waiter. Han Yu could easily find out where Murong Hongtu was sitting without anyone noticing. Here Han Yu could easily find out where Murong Hongtu was sitting. Therefore this was also the reason why Yuan Ming said that they did not want to give Hellion Weiwei any chance to perform. Chapter 335. Young Master Han. A man dressed as a steward walked out of the dazzling auction house. He smiled when he saw Han Yu. Who are these people? Han Yu's expression was indifferent. My friends. So they are young Master Han's friends. Please come in. The steward led the few of them in. Along the way he could not help but turn around to take a few glances at Yun Biluo, who was wearing a veil. He did not know which family this beautiful lady belonged to, but since she came with young Master Han, she must be from an extraordinary background. They looked at each other as soon as they entered the auction house. They looked at each other with a look that only they could understand and went to different positions. Hellion Weiwei didn't really wear a set of waiter's clothes. Instead she draped a green and white robe over her shoulders. She held a fan in her hand and a jade pendant hung on her waist. Every part of her was clearly graceful and luxurious. She looked like a young master from an aristocratic family who came to participate in the auction. However, she had a unique hobby. She did not bring a single servant with her. She walked casually to the second floor. The corridor on the second floor was filled with martial artists carrying swords and wearing long robes. Hellion Weiwei knew that she couldn't force her way into this place as soon as she walked in. Young master, please show your waist token. The martial artist guarding the corridor reached out and stopped her, his face expressionless. Waist token? The light in Weiwei's eyes slightly flashed. She saw that there was also a big-bellied wealthy merchant who came up together with her. His body tilted, pretending to be drunk as he pressed his hand to his forehead. After that, his other hand casually threw the waist token that he'd just stolen to that martial artist. His careless and arrogant attitude instead made that martial artist start to guess the identity of this young man in the end. Without the slightest delay, he let Weiwei pass. The big-bellied rich businessman was still hugging his newly married concubine affectionately. He did not realize that his waist token was gone. He pinched the woman's chin and said, "Wait a moment. I'll show you how many good things General Murong has." "What is it?" The woman also knew how to make people happy. She followed the rich merchant like water. The merchant smiled mysteriously. "We all came from the forest of fantasy. After drinking those things your little face will definitely become prettier. Then let's go quickly." The woman's eyes lit up. He was really interested. The rich merchant reached out and hugged her. He raised his head and wanted to swagger in. The martial artist stopped him, but the rich merchant didn't care at all. He reached out and touched his waist. Then his expression suddenly changed. He let go of the woman's hand and shouted anxiously, "Where is my waist token? Why is my waist token gone?" The cultivator glanced at him and didn't give him the slightest bit of face. He snapped his fingers and called for the rich merchant and the woman to be carried out of the building. He didn't need to think to know what would happen to them. This made Hellion Vivian recall the feeling of facing a drug lord in the past. That drug lord also had a bad temper but was very cunning and suspicious. As long as anyone acted strangely in front of him, he would treat them as an undercover agent and deal with them. Looking at the martial artist's actions, it was not difficult to deduce that Murong Hongtu was a drug lord. However, she still managed to get some useful information. Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks and her eyes became deep. He came from the forest of fantasy and drank something that made him young. It must be the spirit beast's blood. When Xiaobai said this, her voice was much colder. This Murong Hongtu is most likely the culprit who entered the forest of fantasy and killed a large number of spirit beasts. Woman, if it's really him, you must be careful. Not only are his methods sinister, but they are also inhumane. I'm afraid that you can't handle it. Hellion Vivian waved the paper fan in her hand. She looked like a gentleman and communicated with Xiaobai telepathically. Don't worry, I'm good at disguising myself. Hellion Vivian was right. Apart from the military fire, she was also good at disguising herself. Therefore, when she walked into the room, her face quickly changed into an evil smile. The atmosphere in the room was basically what she had imagined. Murong Hongtu didn't come here to participate in the auction. He just needed a secret place to gather all these people. It was a small gathering. Apart from Murong Hongtu, there were 6 to 7 people in the room. There were both men and women. They sat on the sandalwood chairs and chatted with each other. They looked very excited. Hellion Vivian had a feeling that she had entered a cult. However, it only took a moment for her lips to curl into a sloppy smile. I wonder when it will start. I can't wait. Initially, everyone was hesitant when they saw this unfamiliar young man. However, after hearing what Hellion Vivian said, their eyes lit up and they turned to look at Murong Hongtu. Murong Hongtu was still staring at Hellion Vivian. He was in his 40s but his skin was abnormally pale. Especially his eyes, they were always gloomy and gave people an uncomfortable feeling. However, even under that kind of gaze Hellion Wei could still sit down like a ruffian. Then she took out a mirror and looked at her face left and right. I really want to drink that thing and look younger. Murong Hongtu suddenly laughed out loud. Don't worry. You'll definitely look younger. Not only that but will also live forever. As long as you... As he spoke he signaled the person standing next to him with his eyes. That person then brought a tray to everyone. Hellion Vivian did not understand what it meant at first. When she saw the first white-haired old man put in banknotes, she realized that the other party was collecting money. When the tray was brought to her, Hellion Vivian casually threw in 10 banknotes. Each banknote was worth 100,000 yuan. This naturally made Murong Hongtu take a few more glances at her. Hellion Vivian did not seem to notice his gaze. She imitated the expression of the people opposite her, showing desire and greed in her eyes. At this moment Yun Biluo, who had already prepared everything, walked over gracefully. She heard the two people mention Hellion Vivian's name. The main credit goes to us. This time I'd like to see how she's going to monopolize it. However, how did you come up with this idea? That's amazing. I got the idea after listening to someone else. I don't know who gave me a note with this idea written on it. Yun Biluo's voice gradually faded away. There was a faint smile on her face. It was not very clear but it was obvious. Chapter 336. Yun Biluo put down her veil and walked forward with a faint smile on her face. She stopped at the corridor. Your waist tag. The guard stopped her. Yun Biluo looked at the guard with her beautiful eyes. She bowed and spoke in a gentle voice. The guard was intoxicated by her words. He glanced at Yun Biluo and said, "Wait here, I'll go in and report." "Thank you." Yun Biluo retracted her gaze and the smile on her face deepened. In the room on the second floor. "General." The guard walked in from outside and whispered in Murong Hongtu's ear, "The city lord said that he sent a beauty to you." Hellion Vivian was sitting beside Murong Hongtu. Her fingers paused when she heard the guard's words. The beauty should be Yun Biluo and the rest. Yuan Ming smiled evilly. "Woman, I guess that group of people didn't expect you to enter this room earlier than them. They might even think that you're still keeping watch for them outside." Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and did not say anything. She raised her wine cup but did not miss any information. Murong Hongtu smiled when he heard that it was a beauty. However, Hellion Vivian felt that his smile was not that simple. "Sent by the city lord himself?" Murong Hongtu asked. The guard shook his head. "I think it was sent by young Master Han." "Why are you reporting when you're not sure?" Murong Hongtu sneered. "Detain her first and ask her where she came from." The guard lowered his head and answered, "Yes." Hellion Vivian put down the wine cup in her hand and remained expressionless. Yuan Ming narrowed his thin lips. "Woman, it seems that your companions won't be able to carry out their next plan." Hellion Wei did not say anything because Murong Hongtu, who was sitting next to her, was looking in her direction. His gaze reminded her of a cobra lying in the grass for no reason. Hellion Vivian smiled and raised the wine glass in her hand. Only then did Murong Hongtu's gaze become less terrifying. He smiled again. "I saw that you were listening so seriously just now, so I thought you were interested in a beauty. Of course I like beauties, but..." Hellion Vivian paused for a moment, and the tip of her tongue swept across her thin lips. "I want to drink what the general is talking about as soon as possible." Murong Hongtu seemed to be very satisfied with Hellion Vivian's answer and laughed out loud again. Then he put away his expression and gently patted his right hand with his left hand. "Bring it up." Yuan Ming, whose nerves had been stretched taut, immediately let out a sigh of relief. "That was close. I thought he had discovered something. He is very scary." This was Little White's voice. Yuan Ming glanced sideways at Hellion Vivian, only to see that there wasn't a single ripple of emotion on her face. Instead, her lips curled into a devilish smile. Hellion Vivian took a sip of wine. Seeing that the people in front of her had stood up, she also supported herself on the round table and slowly raised her legs. You will see something more ferocious in a while, but don't think too much about it. You know that you have to sacrifice something in order to stay young forever, Murong Hongtu said as he guided everyone to look into the room. Hellion Vivian walked over and looked at the ceiling. She had goosebumps all over her body. Some people even covered their mouths with an ugly expression. Murong Hongtu glanced at that person. That person finally managed to control his emotions. However, the scene in front of them was indeed a little too much. There were two small corpses hanging on the ceiling. The corpses seemed to have become drainage pipes that acted as a link between the two. Drops of blood flowed down the wooden beam and onto the trapped spirit beasts. Hellion Vivian felt her stomach churn. She knew that whatever reaction she was making now was the right one. If she was too calm, it would seem more fake. Murong Hongtu also knew that it would be difficult for people to get used to such a scene for the first time. He laughed and patted Hellion Vivian's shoulder. You'll get used to it after seeing it a few more times. Think about the benefits of drinking it. Hellion Vivian gave Murong Hongtu a smile. Murong Hongtu walked past her and strolled to the spirit beast. Like a barbarian eating raw meat, he opened the spirit beast's head and drank a mouthful of blood. Hellion Vivian furrowed her brows, but the smile on her face did not fade at all. She looked at the spirit beast in front of her. Seemed to have just died not long ago. Its eyes were closed and its mouth was half open. Its head and body were dry and shriveled. Its limbs were as thin as reeds. It was indescribably horrifying. After Murong Hongtu drank a mouthful of blood, his eyes lit up. It was almost visible to the naked eye. He seemed to have become more energetic. He looked at Hellion Vivian and the others and said with a smile, "This feels good." When the white-haired old man saw this scene, he couldn't hold it in any longer. Although the sight of the two corpses made him tremble a little. Despite that, the elder's pursuit of immortality had driven him a little crazy. He closed his eyes and buried his face in another spirit beast's head. When he looked up, he felt like he was floating in the air and he felt like he had endless energy in his body. Great. Murong Hongtu laughed. Who's next? A rich businessman in his 40s had already walked over, but in the end he shook his head. No, I'll pass. I have children too. What's the harm in trying? Murong Hongtu was still smiling. However, Hellion Vivian did not miss the gloomy look in his eyes. The rich businessman shook his head. His expression was terrible. I'll pass. He did not finish the word pass. Then a swoosh was heard. Murong Hongtu, who was standing in front of him, gave him a hard stab. You don't even have the guts to do that and you still want to live forever? Murong Hongtu pushed the rich businessman away with his finger. The rich businessman twitched on the floor a few times. Murong Hongtu waved his hand at the guards and looked a little impatient. Take him away. He's really affecting other people's appetite. In the blink of an eye, a person's life was gone. Hellion Vivian realized that the person standing in front of her was inhumane. It seemed that not only did she have to secretly investigate Murong Hongtu's recent whereabouts, but she also had to think of a way to escape. Wei, you can't drink that blood. Little White jumped out and hit its body. There was vigilance in its eyes. This is not an ordinary spirit beast's blood. They did something to it. Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. You mean the two children just now? That's right. Little White lowered its voice. Although they hid it well, judging from the layout, it looks like a small sacrificial ceremony. Using children's blood as a sacrificial ceremony, the spirit beast's blood will be tainted with evil energy. Once a person drinks it, they will be unable to stop. So you can't break the seal. Chapter 337. Hellion Wei lowered her eyes and listened. She quickly started to think of a way to escape in a moment. There were not many people in the room. Those who wanted to be immortal had already hugged the head of the spirit beast and started drinking. They looked like people who had taken drugs, excited and confused. Hellion Vivian followed suit. She knew that she had to make herself move. If she refused directly, Murong Hongtu would definitely kill her like how he killed the rich businessman just now. Of course, he might not be able to defeat her. However, Hellion Vivian did not forget about today's mission. Tu Su Feng only asked them to inquire about Murong Hongtu's latest news because he wanted to keep a low profile so as not to alert the enemy. Therefore she could not make a move. Why aren't you drinking? The old lady who was standing next to Hellion Vivian looked at Hellion Vivian in confusion. Hellion Vivian did not say anything. Murong Hongtu suddenly opened his gloomy eyes and glanced at her coldly. Hellion Vivian smiled. I have to ask how it tastes first. Besides, it's rare to have such good food. I have to taste it slowly. As she spoke, she looked up and glanced at the guard next to her. Bring me a wine glass. Little brother, you're a person who knows how to enjoy life. Murong Hongtu laughed. Bring me a wine glass too. Hellion Vivian smiled and scooped up the blood with the wine glass. Then she waved her sleeves. I'll drink first. Murong Hongtu stared at her without blinking. When he saw that her cup was empty and there was blood at the corner of her mouth, he retracted his gaze and called out to the others, Come on, let's all have a toast. Amidst the jubilation, everyone had a bewitching smile on their faces. Xiao Bai frowned worriedly. Woman, you didn't really drink it, did you? Why would I? Hellion Vivian clung to her sleeves and coughed softly. There was still a taste of blood in her throat. Yuan Ming laughed. Woman, you are really cruel to yourself. In order to stain her thin lips with blood, she had used her inner force to shake her meridians. Only this woman could do such a thing. Hellion Vivian smiled with a jade-like aura. With her left hand pressed down, she talked and laughed with the people beside her while adjusting her aura. However, at this moment, the old woman seemed to have gone crazy. She sniffed left and right and licked the corner of her mouth with the tip of her bloody tongue. She gave people a strange and terrifying feeling. What is that smell on you? Why is it so sweet? Hellion Vivian took a deep breath and smiled. What smell can I have? This room reeks of blood. Are you sure you're not mistaken? Is that so? The old woman's face was full of doubt. She lowered her head and thought for a while. Then she called the person leaning on the wooden chair next to her. Smell him. Doesn't he smell good? Hearing this, the man looked at Hellion Vivian. Little White stepped back subconsciously. It was worried that some people would notice the existence of the spirit beast after drinking it for the first time. However, Hellion Vivian knew that it was very likely that they would ask about the blood hidden in her sleeve. It does smell good. It smells good. The man's expression was even more intoxicated than the old woman's. He gradually bent down. Hellion Vivian's fingers tightened, but her eyes were as calm as usual. The two of them looked at each other and then walked closer to Hellion Vivian step by step. It does smell good. Murong Hongtu grinned. There was still blood at the corner of his mouth. He turned to look at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian did not move, but she knew what kind of situation she was in. Facing these people who were drooling at her, she felt that these people were not human at all. They were zombies who had lost all their senses except for their sense of smell. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. She held her breath in her palm, but there was no panic on her face. Instead, she made people feel that there was nothing wrong with her. You all have a good sense of smell. Murong Hongtu smiled again. He walked past Hellion Vivian again and pulled the rope hanging on the beam. The smell is coming from this guy. He must have contracted a high-level spirit beast. That's why he can smell so good. As he spoke, Murong Hongtu's fingers tightened and a swoosh was heard. A man in white and green fell down. His body was still tied with an iron chain. The iron chain was specially used to tie up spirit beasts. It was more than enough to deal with humans. The man's head was half lowered. Both of his hands were tied to the beam. His black hair was scattered around the corners of his eyes, just enough to cover his deep and serene eyes. What was exposed was his chiseled jaw and white, straight nose. It was probably because he was put down that the man slowly raised his head. That kind of arrogance and indifference, even though he appeared in this manner, he still couldn't change his stunning appearance. It's him. Hellion Wei looked in astonishment at the man who, even though he was hung up, still showed a lofty and cold temperament. Her shapely eyebrows slightly furrowed. The situation seemed to be a little out of her control. When she came out, wasn't he still in the academy? How could he be kidnapped in the blink of an eye? Just as Wei was thinking, she saw that Bailey Jiaju had already set his gaze on her body. That sexy thin lips slightly curved upwards, looking a bit more flirtatious than usual, only because of the faintly discernible fragrance and the soaring smell of blood at the tip of her nose. After coming out from the cliff, Baligaju began to investigate the spirit beasts. At that time he was not very enthusiastic. If it were not for the appearance of magical beasts in the White Academy, he would not have come personally. He wouldn't come in person either. He had already noticed Murong Hongtu's strangeness from the very beginning. However, he didn't like to eliminate his enemy in one move. He wanted to play slowly. Wouldn't that be more fun? But Murong Hongtu was the first person who dared to kidnap him. Bailey Jiaju's beautiful peach blossom eyes narrowed and once again fell on Wei Wei's body, his long eyebrows wrinkled. Isn't that your man? Yuan Ming's tone became more and more evil. Why is he tied up? Hellion Vivian gave Yuan Ming a very standard answer. He likes to play role-play. Based on her understanding of His Highness, he must have sent himself to be tied up. Such a wicked hobby. Hellion Vivian shook her head in her heart. She heard Murong Hongtu sneered and said, "This person walked around the door twice and thought he could hide from me. How naive." As he said, he took the sharp knife and smiled strangely. With such a good talent, the blood must taste good. It can be used as a catalyst for the spirit beasts in your body. Chapter 338. Heh. Bailey Jiaju looked at Murong Hongtu and suddenly let out a low laugh. He lifted his chin slightly, the lines of his face were perfect. That kind of innate nobility made him appear cold and graceful even though he appeared in this posture. Murong Hongtu's face became even more twisted when he saw his posture. You're not afraid of death. Do you know what you're tied up with? There are only 2 Xianming iron chains in the world. If I pinch it gently, you... Murong Hongtu did not finish his sentence because he saw the man in front of him lift his left hand. Crack. The iron chain was forcibly broken. Broke. How was this possible? Murong Hongtu's eyes widened as he stood rooted to the ground. Baligaju smiled faintly as he rotated his left wrist. His legs were long and straight, his waist was thin and his chest was wide. They formed a perfect inverted triangle shape. He reached out and brushed the non-existent dust off his clothes. He waved his sleeves and the air shook violently. The remaining iron chains wrapped around his body broke one after another. Murong Hongtu could not say a word at this moment. What? Why did you stop? Bailey Jiaju's ink-like long hair floated to the ground. His ink-like pupils emitted a demonic and dazzling light, carrying a noble aura that was hard to ignore. He slowly walked toward Murong Hongtu. His black robe wrapped around his slender figure, revealing a cold, murderous aura. When he walked to Murong Hongtu's side, his appearance changed. He still had that handsome face, but his expression was sinister and vicious. His eyes were cold and indifferent. Murong Hongtu squinted his eyes and threw the 3 knives in his hand at Baligaju. Baligaju's body swayed. No one saw how he moved, but when Murong Hongtu realized what was going on, the 3 knives were already in Baligaju's hands and were thrown to the ground like scrap iron. Those were not ordinary knives. Not only did it have martial chi, but it was also made for him by his master. It wouldn't be a problem for him to kill the sea dragon race. This kind of martial cultivator was actually blocked by a single move. You, who the hell are you? Murong Hongtu trembled as his fingers curled up. He instinctively wanted to run away. Baligaju smiled coldly and slowly reached out his hand. With a loud clang, Murong Hongtu was sent flying into the corner of the wall. A large amount of dust fell from the wall. He straightened his body, his neck was crooked and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. The private room was in a complete mess. Except for Hellion Vivian, no one could move or speak. Only then did they realize that from the very beginning, Baligaju had created a huge barrier. Everyone who was within the barrier had nowhere to run. Fire Qilin, your contracted divine beast is a fire Qilin. Murong Hongtu looked at the faintly discernible divine beast's shadow behind the man. He was so regretful that even his intestines turned green. He never thought that this divine beast with a sweet smell would be a fire Qilin. That was strange. If it was a fire Qilin, he would have sensed the danger from it from the very beginning. The fire Qilin laughed evilly. Tisk tisk tisk. You just casually covered your breath and I treated you like a little white rabbit. At this moment, Murong Hongtu finally understood that everything was a trap. A trap waiting for him to fall into the trap. However, these stupid humans. Did they really think that they could deal with him like this? Haha, this was simply wishful thinking. Murong Hongtu glanced at Baligaju and stuck out his tongue. He licked his thin lips and laughed eerily like a baby. The fire Qilin could only deal with me when I was demonized when I was with that person. No. Hey, you're just a barbarian tamed by humans. There was a path to heaven but you didn't want to take it. Demonized. Hellion Wei Wei furrowed her brows. As soon as she looked up, she saw a translucent shadow floating above Murong Hongtu's head. The shadow's appearance was distorted like a dead baby. Its black nails were buried in Murong Hongtu's hair. It was inexplicably scary. Woman, be careful. This Murong Hongtu is no longer a human. Yuan Ming suddenly said. It was very rare to see such a serious expression. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. She didn't have time to ask how Murong Hongtu became like this, because she could clearly feel that the surrounding atmosphere had changed. When she turned around, she finally understood why the atmosphere had changed. Those people who were sniffing around her just now had obviously lost their minds. They walked toward her and Bailey Jiaju with dull expressions on their faces. If those people just looked like zombies, then they were now real ghosts. Just by looking at those blood-red eyes, it was obvious that it was because they had just drunk the blood of the divine beast. Woman, don't be bitten by them. Yuan Ming directly revealed his figure. The group of people paused and bared their teeth. They seemed to be afraid of Yuan Ming's existence. Some of them didn't dare to get close. Then they looked at Baligaju with greedy eyes. Bailey Jiaju stood in front of Murong Hongtu with a murderous aura all over his body. His whole body exuded an indescribable coldness and cruelty. His eyes were calm as he watched the scene, his long eyebrows slightly furrowed. Woman, quickly think of a way. I haven't fully recovered yet. They will only be afraid of me for a while. After a while I will have to return to the fantasy space. Yuan Ming's forehead was full of sweat. So quickly. So there is one more. Murong Hongtu let out a sinister laugh. His dark red eyes looked at Hellion Weiwei and said, I thought you drank the blood just now. Since you don't want to drink it, then you can just wait to be sucked dry. The devil's emissary behind you won't be able to hold on for long. Besides, what can such a small amount of magic do to me? Sure enough, just like what Master said, you humans are always so full of yourselves. You're so stupid that you really believe in immortality. Huh. Master? In other words, there was a mastermind behind Murong Hongtu? Hellion Weiwei gradually understood something in her heart. Then she raised her eyebrows and used a provocative tone in her voice. Since your master is so powerful, why doesn't he even dare to show his face? He's clearly a coward. You're not allowed to slander my master. The baby on top of Murong Hongtu's head screamed. His sharp voice sounded like a cat crying in the dark. Master, he's the most gentle and intelligent person in the world. His jade-like temperament is as beautiful as his soul. He's not someone you filthy humans can compare to. Chapter 339. As Murong Hongtu spoke, he touched the dead spirit beasts again. Just a little more and I can complete the task given by my master and destroy the peaceful aura here. Who's the one who wants to kill you too? The blue eyes of the baby on top of his head glowed faintly and suddenly stared at Baligaju. I can feel the endless evil aura on your body. If I have your soul, it will definitely be twice the work with half the result. Bailey Jiaju's beautiful peach blossom eyes narrowed. He still hadn't moved when the fire Qilin behind him suddenly blocked in front of him. Its fiery red fur was exceptionally beautiful and hard. If I were you, I wouldn't have any ideas about my master. Fire Qilin, I don't want to fight with you head-on. Are you sure you want to continue staying here? The scene Qi will also drive you crazy. The baby laughed loudly again. The fire Qilin clenched its claws. It didn't like this room, but it couldn't explain why it didn't like it. It was only when Bailey Jiaju mentioned that he wanted to destroy the peaceful Qi here that it suddenly realized something. It looked at the fog that was overflowing from the roof and turned to Bailey Jiaju, saying, Master, you can't stay here. The Yin Qi here would directly affect its master who was already missing a soul. They must leave this place as soon as possible. Following the fire Qilin's words, Hellion Vivian saw something black running out from the corner of the wall. It's a rat. Xiao Bai said in a deep voice, Weiwei, you must stop him. Once the auspicious aura here is destroyed, the White Academy will be affected as well. Hellion Vivian's eyes slowly darkened at this moment. Her small face became colder and colder. She didn't know why, but a bad premonition rose in her heart. Those rats ran back and forth in the room like flies that had lost their direction. After running a few steps, they fell in the corner of the wall. Waves of fishy smell emitted from their bodies, spraying everywhere. When those people saw this, not only were they not afraid, they were even more excited. Hellion Vivian felt more and more that the people standing in front of her could no longer be considered as human beings. Her gaze turned colder. Murong Hongtu sized up the two people in front of him. In the end, he did not choose to attack Baligaju, who had the fire Qilin to protect himself. Instead he set his blue eyes on Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian had just narrowed her eyes when she realized that the baby on top of Murong Hongtu's head had suddenly disappeared. Hellion Vivian paused and immediately turned her head around. She saw the baby sticking close to her back. Its black claws were extended as if it wanted to bury itself in her body. Whoosh! Hellion Vivian immediately slashed with the dagger in her hand. The baby didn't even seem to feel the pain as he extended his claws even further. In a flash, Beligaju moved. When he reached out to pull Hellion Vivian over, his arm was viciously scratched by the black claws. His ivory-white sleeve was cut open and bright red blood immediately flowed out. Yuan Ming's face was so pale that only a faint image could be seen. Oh no, whoever the abandoned baby demonic beast grabs will go crazy. If we don't find a way to break its great demonic curse soon, your man might follow suit and bite. When Hellion Vivian heard this, her calm thin lips tightly pursed. She had no other good points. She was protective of her own people. When she saw that Beligaju's arm was bleeding, her usually indolent little face revealed a strong murderous intent. Murong Hongtu was very disapproving. You've been blocked. I originally wanted to offer your souls to my master. Since you're so disobedient, you can go down and join them. Following Murong Hongtu's words, small expressionless faces suddenly appeared on the roof beam. It turned out that the entire house was hiding corpses. They were all half-grown little people floating in midair. The resentment was getting thicker and thicker, gradually covering the roof beam. Wisps of black fog began to linger and condensed into a whirlpool, as if it was going to suck everyone in. They were like puppets that were controlled by a wireless string. Their fingers stretched out and swayed back and forth one after another. Ferocious, lustful, murderous, and indulgent, they tried to grab hold of anything to climb up or pull people down into the dark underworld. Hellion Wei didn't know why, but an image appeared in her mind. It was as if she had seen this scene somewhere before. The sense of familiarity made her almost subconsciously cut her finger with the blade. Her blood dripped onto the ground, but she was unmoved. Her eyes widened as she chanted the spell, "May I end the future tribulation. I should be responsible for the suffering of all living things. I set up a wide range of conveniences so that you can be free. Let all have feelings, the root of goodness is not corrupted, the foot of God is unhindered like the void. Eliminate all habits of confusion, like the scorching sun dispelling light ice. Listen to my command, unsheathe and slay evil." In an instant, the air around Hellion Vivian seemed to have a current of air. It rapidly gathered from all directions, forming a shape that resembled the 8 trigrams formation behind her. It also looked like an ancient spell that was formed by many complex scriptures. It did not look very real. However, this alone was enough to make the expression of the baby on top of Murong Hongtu's head change. That was the 8 trigrams exorcism formation. The people of the exorcising tribe should have all died long ago. This woman, how could she? As Murong Hongtu's eyes widened, Hellion Vivian waved her hand slightly and uttered the last sentence. "With my life I command the winds and clouds of the world." Whoosh! The 5 elements 8 trigrams formation behind her was like a tumbling net that suddenly covered Murong Hongtu. Then it fiercely tightened. The whirlpool seemed to be penetrated by some kind of force. The black fog quickly dissipated, and the expressionless little face gradually twisted and peeled off. A tearing sound was heard. His sleeves were torn apart. In the blink of an eye, all the black fog was sealed back into the beam. The baby looked at the room that he had painstakingly set up for so long and screamed unwillingly. He rushed over and wanted to bite Beligaju, who was closest to him. However, before he could touch the man's sleeves, he was stopped in midair by an invisible force. Only then did the baby realize that the man's eyes were not the usual black. They were black that was mixed with golden light. The feeling of being burned came from the corner of his mouth. The baby's eyes widened in an instant. He looked at Beligaju's eyes and shook back and forth. This man could actually release martial chi after his arm was grabbed by the baby. Why was that? Chapter 340. The baby did not continue to think about it. It was not for any other reason but because before it could react, it had been burned into a puddle of black water. When the black water splashed onto the ground, a sizzling sound was heard. The resentment completely disappeared, and the room finally regained its tranquility. The people lying on the ground pressed their foreheads as if they didn't know what had happened at all. Their heads swayed back and forth, and when they saw the dead rats beside them, their faces instantly turned pale, and they immediately stood up. However, before they could take a step, they were surrounded in the middle of the room by a group of royal shadow guards who had barged in. Hellion Vivian then realized that His Highness did not barge into the campsite alone but had already set up an ambush. "Take all of them away." Baligaju glanced at Murong Hongtu, who was cowering in the corner. He spoke casually. The dim light in the room seemed to accentuate his extraordinary identity and reflected his noble temperament. "Tell the public that General Murong is an unscrupulous person who accepts bribes." Yes. The shadow guards were very efficient and secretive. They did not leave behind any clues and restored the room to its original state in a short while. The guards inside and outside the room were silently replaced by Baligaju's men, so even the organizer of the auction did not know what had happened here. In addition, there was a wizardry barrier set up in this room. Even if there was a commotion inside, the people outside would not hear anything. Previously, when Yun Bilyua was taken away, the rest of the people had also evacuated from their original positions, so they did not see the scene of the shadow guards. Instead, they were still thinking of ways to get Yun Bilyua to escape without a change in her expression. However, at this moment, Hellion Vivian, who they thought was chased out of the room, had already gotten all the information she wanted. However, this news was not good news, especially when it was facing a morgue. It sent chills down one's spine. Although the baby was gone, it was still uncomfortable to stay in such a room. However, His Highness was not affected at all. Not only was he not affected, but he even set up a wizardry barrier again after the shadow guards left and pressed her against the wooden door. The flickering light shone on his chiseled facial features, making him look ambiguous. Compared to his handsome face, his eyes were even more beautiful. They were like amber gems, extremely beautiful. Hellion Vivian sighed softly. She could smell the unique scent of the man as she breathed. The peach blossom eyes that were supposed to be as cold as ice were now filled with danger. When their eyes met, Hellion Vivian suddenly remembered the kiss she had on Baligaju's forehead before she left. She glanced at the man and felt a little embarrassed. She wanted to shake her head to avoid the other party. Who would have thought that with only a distance of 5 centimeters, Bailey Jiaju would place his arm behind her back. His body was slanted and he leaned his head close to her ear. He said in a low voice, "Who gave you the courage to even kiss me?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Just as she was about to speak, her lips were covered by someone. Baligaju pinned her down with an amazing strength, not allowing her to break free at all. An irresistible gaze, action, breath, rushed toward her. Hellion Vivian wanted to turn her head to avoid the other party's aggressive approach, but in an instant, a hand clasped the back of her head forcefully. Therefore, the contact was deeper, exchanging breaths with each other. Her tongue that was being sucked tried to dodge, but it felt more like a response. Baligaju's eyes darkened. As he sucked on Hellion Vivian's lips, he loosened his grip on her wrist. His large hand gradually slid down and reached under her clothes. Hellion Vivian suddenly trembled. The cold touch made it impossible for her to hold on to anything. She could only pant slightly and try to push him away. It wasn't that she couldn't hear the sound outside, but because she could hear it, Hellion Vivian felt her whole body tremble inexplicably. However, Bailey Jiaju's hand became even more aggressive as it moved upwards. His fingers needed the softness that he loved so much that he couldn't bear to part with it. Hellion Vivian's body couldn't help but bounce, as if every nerve ending had been electrified. "Does it feel good?" Baligaju held half of her softness with one hand, but his lips didn't let go of her at all. He kept sucking and kissing her neck, making her feel as if she was going to go numb. Hellion Vivian was like a cooked shrimp. Even if she resisted with all her might, she couldn't escape from Baligaju's hands except for her instinctive shaking. "Do you want to feel more comfortable?" Baligaju's whisper echoed in Hellion Vivian's ears like a curse. Hellion Vivian didn't understand what was going on with her body. It was probably because she had already dual cultivated, so her resistance to this was extremely low. Her fingers tried to push him away, but her body instinctively craved for further comfort. "You're not going to say it?" Baligaju's deep eyes flashed. He stopped what he was doing and lowered his head. With a hoarse voice, he bit her softness through her clothes. "You can't do this, don't do this." Hellion Weiwei's legs were trembling and her long hair was messy. She leaned her forehead against Baligaju's shoulder. She bit her thin lips slightly, and there was a fatal weakness in the corner of her eyes. "You're so stubborn." Beligaju opened his mouth and sucked on Hellion Vivian's earlobe. His handsome face carried a devilish charm. "Do you know that when you wear men's clothes, I want to press you under me and ruthlessly destroy you?" Along with the kiss, Beligaju's words were like sounds that directly hit the brain, making Hellion Vivian's already numb softness even more unlike her own. She couldn't help but straighten her neck. Because the other party's strength was getting stronger and stronger, that kind of forceful but gentle kneading made her heart stop beating. When she was drugged, she only felt that Beligaju's entire body was cold. If he pounced on her, it would definitely reduce her heat. As for the other feelings, she didn't remember clearly. She only remembered that he made her sit on his waist and thoroughly penetrated that part. At that time she was infatuated and felt comfortable. But she still didn't taste the specifics. When she woke up the next day, she only felt pain. This man, when doing this kind of thing, wasn't indifferent at all. Not only was he not indifferent, he was even a little charming. She didn't know how he learned this experience. Evildoer, he was indeed an evildoer. Hellion Vivian knew that she was not his opponent, so she simply relaxed her body. If I were His Highness, I definitely wouldn't choose this kind of room to coerce and lure prey. Chapter 341. Heh. Beligaju stopped what he was doing and looked at her with interest. Then he lifted her up and slid his fingers across her long legs, making her wrap her arms around his waist in that position. His thin lips pressed against hers and his voice was a little naughty. "You'll want to feel more in a room like this, won't you?" That tone was like a cat playing with a mouse. He was not in a hurry to kill the prey, but only nibbled at it bit by bit, looking for the best position to bite. However, it was hard for Hellion Wei to ignore the heat that was pressing against her. Just like that, he rubbed the softness of her legs with his fingers through her clothes, and there was a seductive sexiness in his eyes. Hellion Vivian bit her thin lips and wanted to push his hand away, but she was a little sensitive because of his heat. "Open your mouth." She suddenly heard Bailey Jiaju's words. His tone was cold and commanding. He didn't know that his low and magnetic voice, which was like a musical instrument, could attract the hearts of many women with his low murmur. He had never paid attention to it before. He also didn't know that there was a hint of provocation hidden in the cold and elegant languor on his body. Hellion Vivian paused for a moment when she felt a tingling sensation in her ears. Before she could react, her chin was lifted and Beligaju's lips covered hers again. The force pressing on her lips was neither light nor heavy, it was warm. Then a breath rushed in. Her breath was filled with the smell of Bailey Jiaju's body. The faint smell of blood and sandalwood mixed together, as if it was cold yet strong. Being hugged by Beligaju like this, Hellion Vivian could only see darkness. Her heart was beating so fast that she almost could not bear it. Beligaju could not see Hellion Vivian's expression, but he could feel her trembling and panting. It was as if her entire body was being controlled by her own hands. She could not escape and her weak struggles were of no use at all. It should be like this. Beligaju's lips curved up. He thought that after getting it he would gradually feel bored. But for some reason this made him feel particularly fresh and exciting. It was different from everything he had done before. He tried to bite her harder. As expected, Hellion Vivian let out an unbearable moan. Beligaju's body trembled as an electric current flowed through his body. His eyes gradually blurred as the blood in his body began to boil. This gave Beligaju the urge to lick the other party clean. In the past he would think that his prey was dirty, but now he only wanted to cover this disobedient person with his aura, or make a mark on the other party's neck. All of Hellion Wei's senses were focused on her neck. That kind of continuous nibbling caused her whole body to heat up a little. What a cute reaction. Beligaju held on to Hellion Vivian's waist. His black eyes flickered with a hint of darkness. For the first time, the excitement brought about by absolute control made Beligaju have the urge to lose control and destroy. Yes, he wanted to hurt her, and even make her cry. Thinking of this, Beligaju stopped in time and pushed Hellion Vivian out. He closed his eyes and suppressed the bloodthirsty desire that arose from that thought. He vaguely had the urge to tear something to shreds. Fire Qilin was originally in the celestial boundary space, adjusting the influence brought about by the resentment of Yin Qi just now, but suddenly felt the unstable martial qi flowing in Bailey Jiaju's body, immediately showed its figure and called out worriedly, "Master." Beligaju's eyes were calm, but those eyes were tainted with a faint demonic aura. Fire Chelan's claws paused. It thought in a muddled manner that perhaps today's matter was not entirely a bad thing for its master. Hellion Vivian also felt that something was wrong with Beligaju. She didn't know why, but that cold gaze coupled with the ivory robe made him look somewhat charming. Could it be that he was affected by the resentment just now? Hellion Vivian didn't stop at all. She reached out and grabbed Beligaju's arm. Looking at the bloodstains, she frowned. She directly plucked a handful of strawberries that grew from absorbing spiritual energy from the dimensional space, crushed them and covered Beligaju's hand. The wound isn't very deep. It shouldn't be infected. Beligaju responded faintly and held her waist. In the darkness no one could see, but the corner of his mouth raised slightly. Even if it was very subtle and difficult to detect, it was still a smile. It was different from the smile he had when he killed someone just now. In fact, the wound on his arm could be removed as long as he used his martial chi. But he realized that the anxious look on her face made people want to take another look. Therefore he decided to leave the wound behind. When he saw the anger and anxiety on Hellion Vivian's face when she saw that he was injured, that kind of subtle concern and nervousness filled his heart with an indescribable feeling. It was as if he was standing under the sun and the sun was shining down. From his body to the bottom of his heart, every part of him that was numb had come alive, causing his lips to unconsciously curve into an arc. Tearing her thoughts apart. It was better to suppress it a little more. He viewed human life as a plaything and could sit and watch anyone die. But when it came to Hellion Vivian, he just wanted to take something to lock her up so that she could only see him. It was still not enough. Such a wonderful feeling. If he didn't monopolize it, he would always feel unsatisfied. When did this feeling of not being able to eat her fill start? Oh right. When she reached out and lifted his chin for the first time and laughed lightly. All he wanted was to press her under his body and do whatever he wanted to her. But it didn't matter. He had time to slowly spend with her. He didn't miss those subtle physical reactions of hers. She couldn't escape. One day he would be able to hear her cry for mercy under him. The more Beligaju thought about it, the bigger a certain part of him bulged. Even his breath carried a scorching heat, but his body didn't move at all. But that pair of eyes that could consign people to eternal damnation stared unblinkingly at Hellion Vivian, from her slightly red neck to her heaving chest. Hellion Vivian didn't know why, but she suddenly felt an unknown numbness in her tailbone. If it wasn't for her strong mental fortitude, she would definitely have let go of his hand and softened in his arms. Even her fingers that were bandaging were trembling. She didn't understand what was going on. It was all a certain highness's fault for looking at her so presumptuously. It was as if he was doing something to her. Beligaju, it's indeed a feast for the eyes. Hellion Vivian was very happy. You finally realized my beauty? Beligaju slowly raised his eyebrows. I was talking about myself. Hellion Vivian. Chapter 342. It's done. Hellion Vivian retracted her hand and distanced herself from Beligaju. In Beligaju's eyes, this kind of reaction turned into a little playfulness. Wei Wei still hadn't forgotten that she still had proper business to attend to. She immediately called in Shadow, who was outside the door. His Highness is injured. The wound needs to be disinfected. Watch him carefully. Don't let him bathe at night. Shadow was originally listening quietly, but when he heard the last sentence, his expression became a little twisted. Don't let Master bathe, it shouldn't be possible. Master had to bathe 3 times a day. He couldn't tolerate even a little bit of stickiness on his body. Hellion Vivian also saw Shadow's dilemma and changed her mind. If he really wants to bathe, find someone to help him bathe. Then don't let His Highness bathe. Whoever dared to touch His Highness could chop off that person's hand. Last time, because of Miss Yun, more than half of the Shadow Guards were punished by His Highness to face the wall for 3 days. This time, if he casually agreed to help His Highness bathe, their heads would be directly separated from their bodies. It's just that what Shadow didn't expect was that at this time, Bailey Jiaju unexpectedly opened his mouth. He leisurely said, "When you come back you can help me bathe. Is it good to always trouble Shadow and the others?" Shadow felt that there was something wrong with his ears. Trouble? This was the first time he heard this word from His Highness. In the past, when His Highness asked the retired emperor to do something, he never used the word trouble even once. Every time, It was so cold that the retired emperor wanted to scratch the wall and always scolded his highness for being an unfilial grandson. But now, Shadow didn't know whether to be surprised that his highness suddenly understood humility, or to be surprised that his highness was willing to let others help him bathe. The fire Qilin actually understood its master's thoughts. In the fantasy space, it licked its incomparably handsome claws and smiled evilly. Master, the black water in your stomach is really getting more and more. The last time you came to White Academy you could obviously ride a horse, but you still insisted on sitting in a carriage. It's obvious that you wanted to bully people. This time Baligaju didn't deny his thoughts. He curled his thin lips and looked at the fire Qilin from head to toe. If those little spirit beasts know that their Qilin boss has such dirty thoughts, I guess you won't be able to keep your position. Fire Qilin. Wait a minute, who is the dirty one? It was merely a qualified ancient divine beast that had seen through its master's thoughts. Based on its master's bad taste, he definitely wanted to do something to her when he was bathing at night. However, Baligaju had a special ability. Every time he spoke in a low voice, it was easy for people to feel that if they didn't follow his instructions, they would be insensible. Hellion Vivian paused. After all, Baligaju was injured because of her. Speaking of which, she didn't know why. His highness seemed to get hurt very easily when he was with her. However, it was also thanks to this man's intervention that the cleanup work was carried out more smoothly later on. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian raised her head and smiled faintly. All right, I'll help his highness bathe. See you at the White Academy later. As she spoke, Hellion Wei Wei strolled out of the room. In the quiet room, the fire Qilin put away its playful thoughts and spoke in a deep voice. Master, did you see that? That 8 trigrams exorcism diagram just now. Yes. Baligaju stood up and turned sideways to adjust his collar. His elegant posture brought out a devilish handsomeness. The fire Qilin lowered its eyes slightly. Logically speaking, the exorcist tribe should have been exterminated long ago. Back then, when its master's soul was still intact, the people of their tribe had thought of all sorts of ways to seal its master into the netherworld. However, its master had never taken them seriously. Only now, Hellion Vivian actually used an exorcism spell. What if one day she finds out about master's true identity? Hearing this, Baligaju's fingers paused in the middle of unbuttoning his outer robe. The corners of his mouth curled up but his eyes were cold. Then don't let her find out. The fire Qilin opened its mouth but did not say anything in the end. It quietly lowered its head and said, yes. However, there was an indescribable worry in its heart. At this moment, Hellion Vivian had already walked to the entrance of the auction house. After turning left and right, she found the little 7th prince. The little one was holding a meat bun and eating happily. If it was not for the red-eyed, green-haired demonic beast under his feet, probably no one would have noticed what had happened here. Because the little one was standing in a hidden place and because the auction house was always bustling with noise and excitement, no one had noticed this side. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and looked at the demonic beast that was gasping for breath after being beaten up by the little one. Where did this thing come from? I don't know either. The little one was very angry when he talked about this matter. But the only thing I am sure of is that it came to snatch my meat bun. I had just taken a bite when it pounced on me from behind. It's so disgusting. Hellion Wei Wei knew that she would not be able to get anything out of a foodie, but Little Seven's combat skills were top-notch. She glanced at the magical beast on the ground again, and the corner of Hellion Wei Wei's mouth curled up. Your 3rd brother is upstairs. The mission is over. Go and look for him first, but don't tell anyone about the appearance of the magical beast. I know. The little one put on a stern face and said, those people thought that 3rd sister-in-law would definitely lose, so they were all running behind that yun. They didn't even notice the appearance of the demonic beast. How stupid. Hellion Vivian patted his head. Even if our little senior brother is a foodie, he is a smart foodie. Little bald head's face was cold and stern. He seemed to be embarrassed. He coughed softly and pretended to be serious. 3rd sister-in-law, you should keep this to yourself. Don't tell anyone. I am afraid that if others know, I will have more suitors. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Little 7, how old are you? You already know how to have suitors. 3rd sister-in-law, go ahead. Little bald head licked his fingers and put on a serious face. I am going to find 3rd brother and ask him what he wants to eat later. Hellion Vivian looked at the little one who was wobbling as he walked. His two short legs were swinging back and forth and he was muttering about all kinds of food. She put her hand on her forehead and smiled. He was still a foodie. However, this Murong Hongtu was more complicated than they thought. The battle spirit forces should not know that Murong Hongtu had been demonized. Moreover, the most important thing was to find out why he wanted to destroy the peaceful atmosphere here. After making arrangements for Little Seven, Hellion Vivian did not stay any longer. She went back to the underground palace as fast as she could to report the completion of the mission. However, Little White and Yuan Ming seemed to be too quiet. Chapter 343. Could it be that he was affected by the resentment just now? Hellion Vivian thought about it and called out, Yuan Xiaoming. Yes. Yuan Ming's deep voice came over. Compared to the usual evil aura, there was a deeper meaning to it. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Are you still feeling unwell? No. Yuan Ming's lips curled up and his figure was faintly discernible. Woman, where did you learn the incantation you chanted at the auction just now? Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks and looked back with indifferent eyes. If I said that I just felt that I had seen a similar incantation before, would you believe me? Yuan Ming stared at her for a while and then smiled evilly. I believe you, but I didn't expect that I would actually make a contract with an exorcist. No wonder those elders call you the Phoenix Girl. The one they call the Phoenix Girl is not me, it's Hellion Jiaoer. Hellion Vivian shrugged. Yuan Ming's thin lips curled up. Woman, you misunderstood me. What I meant was that the exorcist tribe is indeed powerful. In order to reincarnate, they made the world believe that the Phoenix Girl will rule the world. In fact, the Phoenix Girl mentioned here is the descendant of the exorcist tribe. According to the prophecy in the scripture, the descendant of the exorcist tribe will not be reincarnated easily unless the world is in chaos and the demons are invading. Xiao Bai also opened her mouth and said with cold eyes, now that the Exorcist 8 diagrams has reappeared in the world, it means that someone is trying to destroy the Taiji seal that suppresses the demons and demons, so that the demons and ghosts that are suppressed in the underworld can be completely released. For thousands of years, the reason why humans have been able to live so peacefully is entirely because of the Taiji seal. If the Taiji seal is destroyed, it would be like tearing open a hole in the night sky. The demons would no longer care about the law pact and would go on a killing spree because to them humans are the most delicious food. Hellion Vivian was good at grasping the key points. You mean that the other party is doing so much, including Murong Hongtu's intention to destroy the Taiji seal? It's very possible. Xiao Bai nodded. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. It seems that we have to find the dean first and tell him everything. Yes. Whitey retracted its body. Hellion Vivian continued to walk forward with a heavy heart. After entering the underground, the lighting was very poor. She did not know who had lit an oil lamp, but the depths of the tunnel flickered with dim candlelight, making it seem even more eerie. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. She was already walking very lightly, but in this narrow and circuitous passage she was still so loud. It made people feel very uncomfortable, as if there were other creatures here other than her. However, this was the only way to reach the underground palace. Fortunately, the journey was not long. In the blink of an eye, Hellion Vivian had arrived at the meeting point. However, Yun Biluo and the rest were obviously not back yet. And Tu Sufeng was not here either. Strange, didn't we agree to gather here after the test? I didn't expect you to be the first to come back. Suddenly, a slightly deep voice was heard from behind. Hellion Vivian looked back and saw another tutor strolling over with a book in his hand. He sat on the sandalwood chair just like Tu Sufeng and poured tea for both of them. Sit. Hellion Vivian sat down. She knew this meant that there was going to be a long talk. How about them? The tutor raised his eyebrows and asked. Still investigating. Hellion Vivian's voice was very faint. The tutor glanced at her, holding a brush as if he was recording something. Your teamwork awareness needs to be improved. Hellion Vivian knew, but he could not cooperate even if she wanted to. What did you find out? The tutor spoke again. It turned out that he was asking while grading Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian looked at the black spot on his neck. Her eyes paused for a moment and her mind was in a whirl. However, she casually told him what happened at the auction. However, she would always leave some leeway when she spoke. For example, she did not say a word about her ability and what Xiao Bai and the rest told her just now. However, this alone was enough to make the tutor's expression change. We only found out that Murong Hongtu is very likely to be illegally hunting for spiritual objects. I didn't expect him to. It's really shocking. Hellion Vivian brushed her long sleeves across the table, her fingers landing on the cup beside her. The tutor stopped what he was doing and took a sip of water from the cup beside him. It was obvious that he was digesting the news brought by Hellion Vivian. You said that you saw him demonize with your own eyes? The tutor seemed to have thought of something and suddenly raised his eyes. Hellion Weiwei was also drinking tea. When she heard his question, she nodded and said, "But I don't think it's appropriate to use the word demonize to describe it. Murong Hongtu must have been possessed by something." The tutor sitting opposite her heard this and his attitude turned cold. He glared at her. "Possessed? Do you know what you're saying? You're a new member of the Battle Spirit Forces. How do you expect me to respond to such superstitious words?" "But this is the truth." Hellion Vivian calmly crossed her legs slightly, as if she was looking for a suitable excuse. "To be honest, I don't believe that there is such a thing as possession in this world. But after seeing the black shadow above Murong Hongtu's head, I can't help but believe that he is indeed controlled by something. Actually, if there is such a thing as possession, why can't there be such a thing as possession?" The tutor squinted his eyes as if he was thinking about Hellion Vivian's words. "According to what you said, he was no longer Murong Hongtu from the beginning?" "It's very possible." Hellion Vivian ran her fingers across the teacup. "Moreover, the master that he mentioned is worth investigating. Besides, what Murong Hongtu did this time is illegal hunting for spiritual objects. I suspect that there is a possibility that someone who did the same thing as him could be possessed." The tutor frowned. "Why do you think so?" Hellion Vivian picked up the teacup and took a sip. "It's very simple. Because the master that he mentioned needs a lot of bodies." But she still didn't know how Murong Hongtu was possessed. "I didn't expect you to be so smart." The tutor smiled and stood up. He gestured with the teacup. "Tu Feng really has a unique insight. Now it seems that he made the right choice. You won this test." Hellion Vivian smiled and accepted the compliment. She took another sip of tea and said, "Thank you." However, she didn't see that when she lowered her head to drink tea, the tutor's strange and gloomy gaze. Chapter 344. The night was getting darker and darker. At this moment, Yun Biluo, who was outside the academy, had also noticed the problem. After killing the guards with her bare hands, she found out that Murong Hongtu had been taken away by the royal family. "What should we do? We haven't completed our mission yet." The other two young masters were sweating profusely. They had run back and forth, but they didn't have the slightest bit of harvest. Yun Biluo thought about it and said, "We don't have much time left. We didn't expect the royal family to intervene this time. I'm sure the dean didn't expect this as well. Since things have come to this, we can only go back first." "Go back? We didn't find anything. How are we going to explain it when we go back?" Yun Biluo glanced at the two men. "Who said we didn't find anything? Murong Hongtu didn't come here to participate in the auction. He came here to meet people. All the people he met were rich and noble merchants. The way they met was so secretive. He must be trying to hide something. As long as we tell the higher-ups, we'll have completed our mission." "Why didn't I think of this?" The young master's eyes lit up. "Miss Yun, you're so thoughtful. Only the three of us have gotten the news. As for the others, let's not talk about them. Not to mention what Hellion Vivian could do. She definitely didn't get any news. She'll be the last one in the end." Yun Biluo smiled gently. She looked at the darkening night and said slowly, "Since everyone thinks this is a good idea, let's go back. It's almost time." The two men naturally agreed. However, they did not know that the last one in their hearts had already arrived at the underground palace. However, the situation was a little bad. The candlelight in the middle of the palace swayed back and forth. The person sitting across from Hellion Weiwei put down his cup. Seeing that Hellion Weiwei's cup was empty, the corners of his mouth curled up into a sinister smile. That kind of smile could easily send chills down people's backs. Hellion Weiwei furrowed her eyebrows and still didn't move. That person said, "However, even if you win, you won't be alive to enjoy it." As soon as that person finished speaking, Hellion Vivian's fingers shook and her neck went limp. The water in the cup spilled out. Seeing this, the man slowly put down the teacup in his hand. "Are you feeling cold and dizzy? Enjoy the poison in this tea." After saying that, the man wanted to pack up and leave. Are you sure you can walk? To his surprise, Hellion Vivian still had the strength to raise her head. Hellion Vivian continued, shouldn't you be the one feeling cold and dizzy? Suddenly, the man narrowed his eyes and clenched his trembling fingers. He glanced at Hellion Vivian, who should have fainted, and subconsciously looked at the teacup on the table. Hellion Vivian chuckled. You think you can poison me with just a cup of water? You're underestimating me, Hellion Vivian. You. The man wanted to reach out and pinch Hellion Vivian's neck, but he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his internal organs. This woman, she changed the teacup. Just when did this happen? Why didn't he notice it at all? Hellion Vivian stood up and looked at him casually. You're good at acting. If it wasn't for the black spot on your neck, I wouldn't have noticed the problem with the 2 cups of water. It was the black spot that made me hesitate. Because Murong Hongtu also had the same black spot on his hand, I guessed that everyone who drank the blood of spirit beasts would have a black spot on their body like a mark. However, is the blood of spirit beasts really so good that even you, a teacher of the battle spirit forces, couldn't resist the temptation? Haha. That person laughed, blood flowing out of his mouth, and his expression became somewhat bewitched. What do you know? Immortality, that is something that everyone wants. What's more, this blood can give people endless energy. I did this just to make the battle spirit forces stronger. As for you, you've been a good-for-nothing since you were young. You only have eyes for one man, but you've forgotten your grandfather's instructions. Instead of handing the battle spirit forces to such a person, why not let me take over this invincible army? Hellion Vivian laughed and said in a mocking tone, it sounds great, but in the end, you just want to take over the battle spirit forces. So what? The strong do more work. The man's eyes were red. I've done so many things for the battle spirit forces. The battle spirit forces' current achievements are all because of me. Who do you think you are? Hellion Wei's thin lips curled up. It's all because of you? As far as I know, the reason why the battle spirit forces were able to come through peacefully for so many years was not because of you, but because of the headmaster's dealings with the great families. You just couldn't withstand the pressure, and because of your excessive vanity, you became a spy for the 4 great families. I know that you want to get rid of me not only because of the 4 great families' orders, but also because you don't want to hand over the management of the battle spirit forces. That's right. The man put his fingers on the table and sneered. Your headmaster is indeed capable, but he's too stupidly loyal. Just because the old man saved his life, he wants to return the battle spirit forces to you. How capable can a little girl be? Facing that person's questioning, Hellion Wei's expression was still very calm, but the words that came out of her mouth could infuriate people to death. And you were defeated by this silly little girl that you looked down on. Tell me, how stupid are you in the end? Sure enough, when the man heard this, his face twisted in anger. Dragging his poisoned body, he wanted to pounce on Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, and just as she was about to get into a stance, she heard a bang. The man was knocked to the ground by a wooden stick that suddenly flew over. Hellion Wei turned her head and looked over, only to see Tu Sufeng, who was covered in a murderous aura, wearing a green robe, walking over. His pair of phoenix eyes flickered. Why are you here? The man spat out a mouthful of blood and looked at Tu Sufeng in disbelief. He had set a trap and made him go out of the city. When Tu Sufeng wasn't smiling, he gave off an oppressive aura. We've been together for so many years. You don't understand me, but I understand you very well. Why do you think I told you that Wei had the military seal? It was just to test you, and you have disappointed me. So you've been here all along? You've never gone out of the city? The man's eyes shook as if he suddenly understood something. He was very unwilling. Tu Sufeng, you actually set a trap for me. Chapter 345. Tu Sufeng did not bother with him anymore. He waved his sleeves and ordered his men to take him away. Then he turned around and looked into Hellion Vivian's eyes. He smiled faintly. I hope you don't blame me for using this method to test your reaction. At the same time, you can catch the spy. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Tu Sufeng smiled faintly but did not say anything. At that moment, Hellion Vivian only felt that the person in front of her was the smartest person. He was simply amazing. He was indeed His Highness' uncle. This family was not easy to deal with at all. Only little Seven was a little cuter. Tu Sufeng naturally knew what she was thinking. I thought you had gotten used to it after being with Aju for so long. Get used to what? Being tricked. Hellion Vivian also smiled. Tu Feng glanced at the Xian paper on the table and then changed the data on it. Only then did he say, "Your performance has exceeded my expectations. I indeed wanted you to help me lure out the spy. However, when you were sitting here I was already prepared to come out. Later you actually changed your cups. In such a short period of time, you were able to detect that there was something wrong with the other party. Moreover, you were able to quickly deal with it, and later on you didn't even bat an eyelid. Now you are more qualified than anyone to be a member of the battle spirit forces." As he spoke, Tu Feng handed over the banknotes in his hand. This time Hellion Vivian did not ask for the reward. She only looked up at Tu Feng and said in a clear voice, "In the past, I lived a muddle-headed life. No wonder people didn't want me to join the battle spirit forces. But now I am a member of the battle spirit forces. I should be qualified to ask for help from the battle spirit forces." "Are you begging me?" Tu Feng smiled. Hellion Vivian shook her head. Her eyes were clear like jade and indestructible. "I am exercising my right as the successor of the He family." Tu Feng looked at the girl standing in front of him, who was neither servile nor overbearing. It was as if he saw the old man who sat in that position and commanded to kill the enemy. He was not anxious and could control the situation. He was stunned for a moment. Then he curled his lips and said, "What a nice way of saying that I should exercise my rights as the successor of the He family." At this point Tu Feng paused. "In a moment someone will take you to a place. Although I am in charge of the investigation of the battle spirit forces, other people are in charge of the deployment of the army." "Who are the others?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Tu Feng gave her an answer that was not a smile. "Hey family." Hence, that was why the following scene happened. As soon as Hellion Vivian walked into the Hay family's courtyard, she saw the second young master of the Hay family happily jumping over the wall. The two of them merely glanced at each other, causing the manservant behind them to misunderstand. "Young master, how can you not listen to master's words and meet a woman here? It's fine if you meet other people, but now Miss Wei Wei is the third princess consort. You have committed a capital crime." He eyes frowned. "Listen to me first, young master." That manservant decisively interrupted him. "You don't need to explain. I won't believe you. I'm going to tell master now." Without waiting for anyone to react, that manservant ran away and disappeared without a trace. He eyes. "What the fuck is this? Why are you here?" He eyes directly jumped down from the wall, not caring about the iron chains tied to his hands. His domineering appearance did not diminish in the slightest. He was only wearing a black nightgown and the slightly open collar was not fastened properly. Under his handsome eyes, the corners of his mouth were curved. His frivolous smile made people feel that he was gentle and at ease. If a woman saw this, she would not be able to reject such a person and such a smile. However, Hellion Vivian also felt wronged. "Actually, I'm here to look for old Master Haig." "Then why didn't you say so just now?" He eyes moved his head closer. "Help me remove the rotten grass on my head first." Hellion Vivian naturally would not refuse. Just as she was about to raise her hand, she saw old Master Hay, who was wearing a brocade robe, walking over from not far away. His face was gloomy and he was holding a dragon-headed crutch in his hand. There was a little displeasure in his eyes when he looked at Hellion Vivian, but he was still polite. "Third princess consort, what brings you to my humble abode?" Hellion Vivian knew that old Master Hay did not like her. She curled her lips and smiled. "To catch up on the old days." "Catch up on the old days?" Old Master Hay glanced at the moon in the sky. "So late. Third princess consort is here to catch up with my grandson. Does the third prince know?" This was to remind Hellion Vivian that she was already married, and her behavior was improper. Hellion Vivian smiled. "He doesn't know. But I'm not here to look for he eyes. I'm here to disturb you, old Master Hay." "Me?" Old Master Hay glanced at the servant beside him, as if blaming him for not reporting the truth. Then he turned back and looked at Hellion Vivian. "Steward Zhang, go and get ready. I'll talk with third princess consort in the study." "Yes." Steward Zhang bowed his head and accepted the order. He eyes wanted to follow him, but he was nailed to the ground by old Master Hay's gaze. "Add another layer of iron chains for the young master." "More?" Hiai's handsome face instantly darkened by more than half. Hellion Vivian smiled without sympathy and followed old Master Hay into the study. Everyone in the Hay family behaved like a noble family. No matter who came, it was the same. Old Man Hay sat in a wooden chair and blew on the tea that was served by a servant. Then he said, "You came to find me so late at night, and the people following you are Tusufeng's people. It seems that you are already a member of the battle spirit forces." Hellion Vivian nodded faintly. She held the tea in her hand but did not drink it. There was a smile at the corner of her mouth. Old Master Hay saw that she was so indifferent. He could not help but admire her. The profound world that you and Zay are opened is not bad. It's okay in the north, but the operation needs to be strengthened. Hellion Vivian did not exaggerate or belittle herself. Old Master Hay, you are also doing business. You can teach us in the future. We haven't opened the market in the south. Old Master Hay waved his hand. Now it's the world of you young people. Your grandfather and I were like you and Zake. We were always fearless and killed enemies side by side. So he eyes and I can only be brothers, not husband and wife. Hellion Vivian followed his words. Old Master Hay was stunned for a moment and laughed. No wonder your grandfather said that you were smart when you were young. Now it seems that it is true. I'm still not smart enough. The light in Wei Wei's eyes dimmed, but seemed to be brewing a lot of emotions. If I was really smart enough, Mother wouldn't have died and I wouldn't have been schemed against and driven out of the Defense Division's residence. So much so that even the people in the clan wanted to remove my name. Chapter 346. Old Master Hay's hand paused as he drank the tea. His emotions surged and finally turned into a sigh. Girl, it's been hard on you for so many years. A sword that has been sharpened for 10 years. Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea and said slowly, sometimes suffering a little can make people sober. The most she had suffered in her life was slaps. In modern times, her stepmother's disgust would always cause her to be beaten for no reason. No one had ever thought of giving her dates to eat, not to mention listening to her grievances. At that time she liked to hide in the closet to sleep because she felt that it was the safest place. She knew better than anyone that in this world, one could only rely on one's own hands to create one's own empire. It was the same now. She would take revenge on those she hated. She would not blame those who did not help her. Because no one said that they had to help you. Old Master Hay looked at the pair of eyes that were as firm as water and made a decision. I'll take you to the military camp now. Hellion Vivian saw him and complained about so many years of suffering. He might not accept her immediately, even if he knew about her current achievements. However, the young girl standing in front of Old Master Hay was neither anxious nor impatient. She was neither lukewarm nor angry, but she had her own unique arrogance. He really felt sorry for such a child. After all, it was not that he had not heard the rumors in the capital all these years. When he heard that his unfilial grandson was getting close to this girl, he was half happy and half worried. Probably everyone in the world thought that he did not like Hellion Vivian's style. He did not like her, but more than that, he was disappointed that she did not live up to his expectations. He had also thought of simply letting his unfilial grandson marry Wei Wei. At least in the Hay family he could protect her. But at that time the old man said before he died that he wanted to see his only granddaughter become a talent. So he protected this girl from behind many times, but he could not protect her too much. Now all of this was finally worth it. After that, Old Master Hay took Hellion Vivian to the back of the mountain. In the fog of the night no one knew how Old Master Hay walked. An extremely secluded valley appeared in front of Hellion Wei Wei. All the animals that passed by the entrance of the valley were scared away by the murderous aura inside. At this time the unique sound of soldiers training could be faintly heard from the valley. This was where the hidden army of the Hellion clan was hiding. So God was hiding here. No wonder no one could find him. Hellion Vivian looked at the entrance of the valley and raised her eyebrows. This was indeed a good place. However, she didn't expect that as soon as she finished speaking. A soldier's unique sonorous voice rang out, "Halt your steps. This is a restricted area for our army. Unauthorized personnel, please leave quickly. Be careful not to provoke a fatal disaster." "It's me. I've brought the descendant of old General Hellion." Old Master Hay stood with his hands behind his back. There was not a trace of emotion on his face, but his voice was deep and powerful. When the soldiers guarding the entrance of the valley heard Old Man Hay's voice, they immediately appeared and knelt on one knee. "Get up." Old Master Hay took the lead and walked forward. The soldiers replied, "Yes." They followed behind Old Master Hay respectfully. However, when they looked at Hellion Vivian again, there was a trace of disdain in their eyes. Hellion Vivian turned a deaf ear to the soldiers' stares and walked into the valley. "Woman, this soldier doesn't like you." Yuan Ming's voice was still very charming. Hellion Wei Wei smiled, her thin lips curved up to reveal a bit of black-bellied flavor. When the two of them entered the valley, they saw many well-built men in plain clothes. They were either practicing alone, in pairs, or in groups. Every one of them was practicing in the school field. It was very lively. Old Master Hay seemed to be saying something to one of the young generals. That young general was wearing a straight military uniform. There was not a single crease on his clean clothes. Under his black hair was an expressionless handsome face. His skin was a sexy bronze color. His lips were very thin and the tip of his nose was very high. A pair of black eyes were like crystals, faintly shining like glass. When he heard Old Master Hay's words, he seemed to look at Hellion Vivian. That kind of gaze had a trace of inquiry, but it was so handsome that it was breathtaking. "I didn't expect that there would be such a beauty in this group of soldiers who are always fighting and killing." The person who spoke was Yuan Ming. Hellion Vivian crossed her arms and smiled faintly. "What? You like him? Lousy likes men." Yuan Ming blurted out in a moment of desperation. Hellion Vivian snorted. "You finally admitted it." Wait a minute. I was wrong." Yuan Ming anxiously wanted to explain. Hellion Vivian directly cut off the telepathic communication with him. Yuan Ming could only scratch at the wall in the fantasy space. Little White glanced at him, and that glance contained countless hee-hees. Two people in the distance were talking. Although it was said to be a conversation, in fact it was only Old Master Hay talking. And that young general did not say a word from beginning to end, nor did he look at Hellion Vivian a second time. Hellion Vivian was a secret agent, so of course she knew what this meant. 1. He did not like her. 2. He played a key role in whether she could obtain the hidden army or not. 3. This person must have the same obsession with cleanliness as His Highness. It could be seen from his military uniform that was not stained with a speck of dust. For he was very difficult to approach. However, there was one thing that Hellion Vivian did not understand, and that was the way he looked at her seemed to be mixed with too many emotions. Did they know each other before? Before Hellion Vivian could figure it out, she heard a cold laugh. "What right does a piece of trash like you have to be here? Quickly go back and find someone to marry. After you give birth to a child, send it to us for us to raise, and then restore the glory of the Hellion family." The person who spoke was standing next to the young general. He was almost 2 meters tall and his muscles were bulging, giving people a strong sense of oppression. His standard square face was filled with obvious anger. "Captain De Xiong is right. Instead of you, you should send a child here. Anyway, you only know how to hang around that Lord Murong. Many of our brothers have died because of you. Do you know that a person like you is not worthy of our lives? Get out of here, you are not welcome here." Waves of resentful insults and chastising voices rose and fell one after another. Hellion Vivian stood tall and looked at De Xiong in front of her, and then looked at the eyes of the other soldiers. He was not angry. She also understood how disappointed these people would be when they found out that the person they were supposed to be loyal to was a love-struck fool who only knew how to follow behind a man. "But whether I am a piece of trash or not, whether I am worth your lives, we will know after a competition, right?" Chapter 347. When Hellion Vivian spoke, there wasn't a trace of anger or dissatisfaction in her tone. She lifted her chin slightly, giving off a natural air of indolence. When De Xiong heard that Hellion Vivian wanted to compete with him, he was so angry that he laughed instead. "Since you want to compete, then I'll help old General Hellion teach you a lesson, you good-for-nothing descendant." Compared to De Xiong, Hellion Vivian was much more polite. She simply said, "Please." Her indifference naturally aroused the crowd's dissatisfaction. "Captain, don't be polite with her. You must teach her a lesson." As the crowd flew into a rage, it was too late for Old Man Hay to stop them. He looked at the young general beside him and said with a sullen face, "Don't they know that Hellion Vivian is no longer the useless person she used to be? While you were recuperating, the capital had undergone earth-shattering changes. Even if they don't know Qian, you should know that the armament in your hand was personally made by Hellion Vivian." "I know." Qian's tone was indifferent. "However, I can't convince the crowd." Hearing this, Old Man Hay frowned. At this moment Hellion Vivian and De Xiong had already arrived at a corner of the drill ground. After the two of them stood still, De Xiong pointed to the weapon rack and said, "Go and pick your weapon. I'll give you some of my bare hands." Hellion Vivian's mood was not affected by the sneers around her. A trace of an evil smile appeared on her slightly indolent face. "No need. I brought my own weapon. Please give me some pointers. Since you're looking for a lesson, I'll fulfill your wish." De Xiong did not say anything else. His figure flashed, and with an agility that did not match his majestic body, he rushed towards Hellion Vivian. His pair of iron fists created a gust of wind wherever they passed. When Hellion Vivian saw De Xiong rushing towards her, her beautiful eyes gradually narrowed into slits. However, her posture did not change. She still stood there casually. When Da Xiong's big fist appeared in front of Hellion Vivian bent over and dodged it. Then she threw an uppercut at Da Xiong's chin. De Xiong did not expect that this good-for-nothing descendant would be able to dodge his punch. Just as he was feeling shocked, sensing the dangerous aura below his head, he hurriedly tilted his head and barely dodged Hellion Vivian's fist. When Hellion Vivian saw that her attack had failed, she bent down and supported herself with one hand. She kicked Da Xiong's face from behind with her right foot. Da Xiong barely dodged Hellion Vivian's fist in surprise. Before he could stabilize himself, he felt a sharp pain in his forehead. Hellion Vivian had kicked him. Hellion Vivian's kick made De Xiong stumble backward. While his mind was in a daze, Hellion Vivian followed closely behind. She leaped high into the air, grabbed De Xiong's head and hit him hard with her elbow. Bang! De Xiong, who was full of confidence, was hit by Hellion Vivian and fell to the ground. His ears were buzzing and he could not get up for a long time. All the soldiers were dumbfounded. They looked at De Xiong on the ground with disbelief gradually appearing on their faces. De Xiong shook his head twice and wanted to get up and fight again. At this time Red Flame, who was in a neat military uniform, walked over. His waist-length black hair fluttered gently in the wind. There was no trace of expression on his cold face. However, he reached out and pressed De Xiong's hand. His voice was calm, but it was oppressive. "If you continue to fight, you will lose." "That's not necessarily true. I only used less than 1/5 of my strength." De Xiong shouted unwillingly. "I saw that she was a woman, so I didn't really use my full strength." Qi Yan glanced at Hellion Wei with an indifferent expression. "You only know that you've used less than 1/5 of your strength, but didn't you notice that she's wearing weights on her feet and hands?" "Weights?" De Xiong seemed to be in disbelief. He deliberately glanced at Hellion Vivian. When his eyes came into contact with her wrists, he could not help but be stunned. Did she really wear weights? This woman actually wore 3 heavy buckles and came to compete with him? Moreover, her speed just now was so fast that it did not seem like she was wearing weights at all. Red Flame's voice was cold, but it sounded especially textured in the middle of the night. Not only that, but she also did not release her martial qi. De Xiong's expression completely froze when he heard this. Wei also didn't conceal her body's martial qi cultivation. Her thin lips slightly curved, one hand spread out, her long sleeves fiercely fluttering. One could only see that the wind surrounding her body seemed to have been manipulated by her, forming a huge current of air, lingering on both sides of her body. And she was just like a queen who controlled the wind under heaven. Her long and narrow eyes carried a smile of her own way, unexpectedly giving birth to a breathtaking feeling on that dark face. How can this girl have such strong martial qi? Not only the surrounding soldiers, but even old Master He himself was shocked and a little excited. It seemed that the reinvigorating of the hidden army and taking back the general's residence was just around the corner. De Xiong was the closest to Hellion Vivian, so he could see the clearest. If she had raised her martial qi from the beginning, he would not even have had the chance to make a move, let alone talk about winning or losing. After an uproar, there was an unprecedented silence in the drill ground. Hellion Wei looked at the soldiers in front of her. Her attitude was neither anxious nor impatient. "I know that all of you were disappointed by my actions in the past, but those were not my original intentions. I was framed, my meridians were broken, and I lost my martial qi. I was muddle-headed all year round, thinking that I was being pampered and raised, but I didn't know that someone was deliberately putting me on a pedestal. Now I have also changed. Although I can't be gentle, I won't be like before, chasing after someone. Because the only thing I want to do right now is to take back everything that originally belonged to my Hellion family, and this includes your trust. I dare not say that I can make you risk your lives for me like my grandfather, but I promise that even after 100 years, there will be people who will remember our invincible hidden army. Her voice was not loud, but it seemed to penetrate the blood vessels of the people. When the soldiers heard the cause and effect and saw her strength, they only felt that the blood in their chests was about to surge out. At this moment they realized. They had been waiting all this time. Waiting for the real arrival of the descendant of the He family. Undoubtedly, this moment was what they had been waiting for. The soldiers looked up and saw the cold and slender figure under the moonlight. She was not tall, but she gave people the feeling that she had the world in her hands. De Xiong was the first person to provoke Hellion Vivian, but at this moment he simply knelt down on one knee and said in a deep voice, I, son De Xiong, am willing to follow the young master to death. His words were like a spark that started a prairie fire. The soldiers shouted one after another, echoing throughout the entire valley, we are also willing to follow the young master to death. Hellion Vivian looked at this scene and took a deep breath. She could even feel the coldness in the air. Finally, she had the capital to take back the general's residence. Chapter 348. The last one was Qian. He did not kneel. Instead, he silently raised the flag on the drill ground with one hand and placed it in front of Hellion Weiwei. He was dressed in a military uniform and he stood tall and straight. When his eyes met with Hellion Vivian's, they were as deep as the sea and as deep as the night. At that moment, thousands of soldiers behind him cheered excitedly. Hellion Vivian knew that this person had an extraordinary influence in the hidden army. Later she heard Old Master He talk about his background. Only then did Hellion Vivian know that this person was the first young master of the Qi family who was personally invited to the palace by the emperor. At the age of 17 he had won against all the officials in the virtual hunt. It was no wonder that he had such a presence. Hellion Weiwei smiled, the corners of her mouth slightly curved. However, she realized that Qian had been looking at her. His gaze was a little unfathomable. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows at him. When Qian brushed past her, he sneered, it seems that you don't remember anything. Wait a minute, what should she remember? Hellion Vivian frowned slightly. What was going on? Old Master He did not hear anything. He patted her shoulder and said in a dignified voice, good job, girl. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and nodded. She seemed to have thought of something and said, I still have something to discuss with Old Master He. Shall we go into the tent? Old Master He nodded. Qian looked back at Hellion Vivian. The three of them sat in the military tent with hot tea in their hands. Hellion Vivian was a person who could not hide things. Looking at Qian's cold and handsome face, she thought for a while and said, young Master Qi, did you have a crush on me before? Old Master He spat out a mouthful of tea and coughed heavily. Qian's handsome face was already half black. Is that what you want to say? Of course not. Hellion Vivian observed his expression. I just don't want there to be any misunderstanding between us. Scarlet Flame's smile grew colder. What misunderstanding could there be between us? Hellion Vivian curls his thin lips and smiles. Good. Scarlet Flame looked at her and found it interesting. Then he said to Old Man He, she doesn't even have her memories. Old Master He also frowned. Hellion Vivian also knew that there were loopholes in her memory. On the day I sank into the lake, I hit my head. There are some things that I remember and some that I have forgotten. Is that so? Scarlet Flame's long and narrow eyes glanced in her direction. Hellion Vivian nodded. So, can you tell me now what happened between us? No. Scarlet Flame's tone was indifferent. Forget about it. Hellion Vivian was rendered speechless. Old Master He looked at the two of them and couldn't help but laugh. Since the other party didn't want to talk about it, Hellion Vivian didn't continue to harp on this issue. However, she was sure of one thing. This man really couldn't get along with her. However, when it came to important matters, he was a trustworthy person. Hellion Vivian curled her thin lips and said, I will ask someone to send a batch of weapons over in a few days. When the weapons arrive, I want to modify them and let the people of the hidden army familiarize themselves with the operation of these weapons as soon as possible. Change weapons? Old Master He obviously didn't agree. Scarlet Flame's tone was very cold. Everyone in the hidden army has their own unique weapon, so there's no need for weapons. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian smiled. Old Master Hay thought that she didn't like to hear this, so he said, "Girl, you just came to the army not long ago and aren't familiar with these people. They all have their own independent personalities. If you suddenly change weapons for them, they won't be used to it. I know that you're good at martial arts. That's why I need you to purchase a large amount of firecrackers materials and heat-resistant metals. This matter requires absolute confidentiality." Qi Yan looked at her. He seemed to be a little careless, but he went straight to Hellion Vivian's weakness. "How did you make this thing?" Hellion Vivian would not say that she was actually a person who had transmigrated. Of course not. She would definitely be burned to death by him as a demon who had taken over her body. Therefore, she put on a serious expression and said, "I didn't want to say it first, but since you asked, I'll tell you. Wei Wei." He eyes raised his eyebrows. When did his grandfather become so amiable? There was a problem. Old Master Hay waved his hand again. "Scope. Goodbye." Hellion Vivian didn't delay. After all, she still had an agreement. Since they were sitting in the same carriage and the oil lamp was lit, he eyes naturally noticed something that others didn't. "What's with your neck?" "Neck?" Hellion Vivian reached out and touched her neck. She glanced sideways at the reflection in the bronze mirror. In an instant, the temperature on her face rose a few degrees. She remembered Qi Yan's slightly cold gaze in the military camp. Only then did she realize that it was all because of the marks left by a certain prince. "This doesn't look like a mosquito bite." The evil smile in Hei's eyes grew stronger, but he was a little surprised. He knew very well what kind of person the current third prince was. He was cold and distant on the surface, but he was also like that on the inside. Although he was cold and courteous, he wouldn't get close to people in reality. He also had his own set of principles. He would never argue with anyone, but you could feel his displeasure and the strong pressure he unintentionally exerted on you. So until now, even the elders of the 4 great families didn't dare to really offend him. At that time, when Wei Wei was going to marry the third prince, Hei's was worried that she would become that person's chess piece. Because she didn't have any family power to support her. The third prince married her mostly because of the pressure from the retired emperor. But now, the third prince's behavior towards Wei Wei simply made Hei's jaw drop. He didn't expect that the third prince, who was seriously obsessed with cleanliness and hated physical contact with people, would so brazenly leave a kiss mark on another person's neck, brazenly treating it as if it was his own personal property. Some people said that on the wedding night, the third prince entered the bridal chamber because of Wei Wei's face. Since when did His Highness learn to consider other people's opinions? Most of the time he was the one who made the decision on his own. So the third prince couldn't help but do it? When he thought of this, Hei's looked at Hellion Vivian sympathetically. Being chosen by a man like the third prince was worse than being a chess piece. She even had to be branded before she left the house. Wei Wei looked at the expression in Hei's eyes and knew that he'd already guessed everything. He might as well not hide it anymore. She raised her eyebrows and said, "According to your experience, how many days does it take for this mark to disappear?" She couldn't always wear this lovey-dovey kiss mark and stroll back and forth in the academy. Judging from the strength, it will take at least 2 or 3 days. Hei's smiled with a gloating tone. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. "It seems that we have to buy a long robe with a high collar. Bring the royal along and let him spend the money." Hellion Vivian was quite satisfied with Hei's words. Soon they arrived at the place where they parted ways. But what Hellion Vivian didn't expect was that the moment she jumped down from the carriage, she saw Rebellious and the rest returning to the academy at the same time. Chapter 350. Rebellious saw her as well. Her gaze landed on the carriage that was moving forward. If she was not mistaken, that should be the Hay family's carriage. "I've long heard that Miss Wei Wei and young Master Hay are close friends. Seeing you today, it's true," Rebellious said with a gentle smile on her face. When the other 2 people heard what she said, they both curved their lips one after another. When they looked at Wei Wei again, their gazes clearly contained a bit of disrespect. It could be assumed that they also considered Wei Wei to be a girl who didn't know how to behave properly. Hellion Vivian did not bother with them. She yawned and continued walking forward. One of the young masters recommended by an aristocratic family sneered behind her. She was supposed to be carrying out a mission, but she went missing halfway. We even had to look for her outside the auction. The other person patted him on the shoulder. You'll only make yourself angry if you say this. Don't worry, the battle spirit forces is not like other places. These things will be reported to the higher-ups. The mentors will naturally deal with it accordingly. They know who did and who didn't. When the time comes, we'll be the ones to pass, not the others. You're right, that person laughed and gave Hellion Vivian a contemptuous look. When Hellion Vivian could not be found, Yunbiluo thought that she came back first because she had received some news. Now it seemed that she had just arrived at the academy. Thinking of this, Yunbiluo put on a decent smile on her gentle face. She nodded at the two people gently. It's almost dawn, let's go. As she spoke, she glanced at Hellion Vivian and said, Wei Wei was mainly in charge of the peripheral work. Although she left in the end, she did put in some effort. However, it's not convenient for us to tell you the news that we found. I hope you can understand. When Yunbiluo said this, her face was filled with a faint smile. She was like a fairy cruising in the holy light, pure and flawless. No one could bear to hurt her. Hellion Wei Wei's lips curled into a cold smile. Her pair of starry eyes that were as tranquil as an ancient well didn't have the slightest ripple. Her voice was very calm. Of course I understand. Isn't this the reason why you guys used so many ways and means to throw me to the outskirts? Hearing this, the expressions of the two young masters changed. Yunbiluo bit her thin lips. Her eyebrows were filled with melancholy and sadness. She said in a hoarse voice, Wei Wei, did you misunderstand me because of His Highness? Misunderstanding? Hellion Vivian smiled disapprovingly and said, How could I misunderstand you? Besides, Miss Yun, I have to remind you that we are not that close. You can call me Third Princess Consort. The words Third Princess Consort made Yunbiluo's fingers tighten. She looked at Hellion Vivian as if she was in pain. I just want to make friends with you. Since Miss Vivian thinks that I'm out of your league, then forget it. Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks. Looking at the expression on Yunbiluo's face, she suddenly lowered her body. Hellion Wei Wei's height had always been taller than the average girl. She was 170 centimeters tall with two slender long legs. Her chest and waist were very standard. When her charm was fully unleashed, it was a strong queen's temperament. Especially with her posture, she tilted her head and looked at Yunbiluo, who was a head shorter than her. Lowering her voice, she gave people a comfortable and handsome feeling. Yunbiluo, I know why you came to the White Academy. You don't have to pretend anymore. Others may not know why Heiju ostracized me, but do you think I don't know? What benefits did you promise her to make her defy Beligaju's order and spread rumors about me everywhere? Yunbiluo's expression changed when she heard these words. She looked at Hellion Vivian with eyes full of doubt and disbelief. She muttered, Miss Vivian, what are you talking about? What's wrong with Heiju? Hearing Yunbiluo's denial, Hellion Wei Wei slowly straightened her body and smiled faintly. Miss Yun, there's one thing about you that I really admire. Your acting skills are so good that it's almost perfect. Hearing this, Yunbiluo's face turned even paler. Her forbearance and grievance coupled with her good looks. Compared to Hellion Wei Wei's current indifferent and dark complexion, it was simply a contrast between Snow White and an evil empress. The two young masters in front could not stand it anymore. Miss Yun, why are you telling her these things? She didn't do anything. It's reasonable that she didn't get any news. Yunbiluo tried hard to take a deep breath, as if she was suppressing a great grievance. She raised her beautiful face and said in a weak and hoarse voice, I'm the one who's climbing up the social ladder. Let's go quickly. The dean is still waiting for our news. The two young masters nodded and looked at Hellion Vivian coldly. When the time comes, don't be a sore loser. A sore loser? Hellion Vivian rubbed the banknote that the dean insisted on giving to her with her fingers. She smiled faintly but with a hint of evil. Yuan Ming, on the other hand, was rejoicing in his misfortune. I wonder how these people will react when they hear the news of your victory. Hellion Vivian smiled and did not say anything. She followed them. Her green and white robe fluttered slightly. Her temperament was cold and her laziness did not diminish at all. Soon Yunbiluo and the rest arrived at the underground palace. Tisufeng sat in front of the desk with a cup of hot tea in his hand. He exuded the charm of a man of his age. He was gentle and gentlemanly. Have a seat. As usual, he asked someone to pour tea for the students. After seeing Hellion Vivian who came in last, he smiled and set his eyes on Yun Biluo and the rest. Yun Biluo stood up. Her voice was neither fast nor slow. She smoothly told Tu Sufeng about the result of their discussion at the auction. Tu Sufeng took a sip of tea with a smile on his face. That's it. Yes. Yun Biluo smiled gently. The intervention of the royal family made it impossible for us to continue the investigation. However, judging from the current news, Murong Hongtu is indeed problematic. Tu Sufeng nodded and put his hands on the desk. You said that Murong Hongtu met with rich businessmen. What's the purpose of his meeting with them? Yun Biluo paused and said, We're not sure about this. However, since he met with rich people, it should be related to corruption. That's right. The other two people chimed in. Their gazes towards Yun Biluo were filled with admiration. Miss Yun was indeed worthy of her reputation. Her reaction was quick enough. However, Tu Sufeng just glanced at Yun Biluo and did not say anything else. Yun Biluo did not notice at first. Later on, she realized that Tu Sufeng had not spoken for a long time. She asked awkwardly, Dean? Chapter 351. There were 6 of you when you went out. Tu Sufeng didn't follow up with her words. Instead, he suddenly said, They came back separately. Right now there are still 2 people who haven't come back. Who can explain to me where those 2 people are right now? Yun Biluo was speechless. However, Hellion Wei opened her mouth and said, It's my fault for forgetting to report this. Little 7 is still too young. After completing his mission, he followed the 3rd prince home to sleep. Young Master Han needs to clean up the loose ends. This way, no one will be able to know about this matter and achieve absolute secrecy. Young Master Han's identity is most suitable for this task. Very good. Tu Sufeng nodded, then met Yun Biluo's gaze. There must be something wrong with the person the battle spirit forces asked you to investigate. If there is nothing wrong, they won't ask you to investigate. The main thing is, have you found out what's wrong with Murong Hongtu? Obviously you didn't find out anything. The 2 young masters were anxious to explain. However, they were interrupted by Tu Sufeng slowly. Young Master Li, maybe you know these 2 people. As he spoke, Tu Sufeng glanced behind him and ordered, You can come out now. Yes. A sloppy voice was heard. Hellion Vivian followed the voice and looked over. She saw a clean-looking man strolling over. Gradually, his figure and appearance appeared in the swaying light. When the 2 young masters saw the man again, their expressions changed completely. They looked at each other in panic. It was obvious that they had a guilty conscience. Yun Biluo did not know what happened. There was no smile on Tu Sufeng's face. I have already warned you again and again not to reveal your identities to anyone, and not to reveal any information about the battle spirit forces. But clearly someone has ignored my warning. Upon hearing this, the 2 young masters fell back to their seats with a thud. How can this be? How can this person be here? Did you think that I wouldn't send someone to follow you when you were carrying out the mission? Tu Sufeng's gaze swept past them. Every one of you has your own test. Just because you were left alone and were threatened with a knife, you betrayed the battle spirit forces. The battle spirit forces will not take back such people. Charm, take these 2 people down and erase their memories. The man called Charm smiled evilly and easily lifted the 2 people up. Let's go, you 2 cowards who are afraid of death. Yun Biluo was a little dizzy from the scene in front of her, but as long as she was not the one being taken away, everything was fine. Miss Yun. Tu Sufeng retracted his gaze from the 2 screaming men and shifted it to Yun Biluo. Your performance was a little too strong, but you passed. Hearing that, Yun Biluo's thin lips curled upwards. She then looked at Hellion Vivian with a smile on her face. But what she didn't expect was that Tu Sufeng's next sentence was actually, the winner of this test is still Wei Wei. Wei Wei, you can keep the prize money. Hellion Vivian's expression did not change at all. On the other hand, Yun Biluo's smile looked a little stiff. She bit her lips awkwardly and forced a smile on her face. In an instant she had returned to her original elegant demeanor. She raised her cup to Hellion Vivian and said, Wei Wei, congratulations. Hellion Wei Wei did not refuse and glanced at her with interest. Then she raised her cup slightly and drank the tea in one gulp. Her tone was indifferent as she said, Miss Yun's memory doesn't seem to be very good. I've said before that we're not that close, so please don't call me Wei Wei anymore. As soon as she finished speaking, Helian Weiwei did not care if Yun Biluo was feeling wronged like a young girl who lost her footing. She turned around and said to Tu Sufeng, "If there is nothing else, I will go back to sleep now." After going back and forth for an entire night, there were only 2 fights in one night. In addition, these people were not easy to deal with. Especially the baby who possessed Murong Hongtu's body. It made Helian Vivian even more uncomfortable. She even wondered if His Highness would use insecticide to kill her if he found out that she was using someone else's body one day. Tu Sufeng saw her yawning twice in a row but did not stop her from asking about the hidden army. Since she came back with a smile, the result should not be too bad. Yun Biluo looked at the 2 people who had ignored her. Her fingertips that were holding the white handkerchief tightened silently. Her face was stiff and slightly pale, and her beautiful eyes overflowed with a weak dim light. She looked at Tu Sufeng pitifully. However, Tu Sufeng did not look at her again. He lowered his head and seemed to be dealing with official business. Ding. After Helian Vivian left, Yun Biluo spoke. "Does the retired emperor still dislike me being around His Highness?" Tu Sufeng put down the brush in his hand and faintly glanced at her. A few simple words. "This is the Battle Spirit Forces camp. It's not suitable to talk about private matters. Moreover, this kind of matter you should directly ask retired emperor." Yun Biluo knew when to advance and when to retreat. Now that she heard Tu Sufeng's words, she quickly suppressed the bitterness in her throat and smiled. "I understand. I'll go back to my room. And you should rest early too." Tu Sufeng nodded. He looked at Yun Biluo's disappearing figure and frowned slightly. He did not know what his cold nephew thought of Yun Biluo. So far there were so many versions of the rumors. He did not know which one to believe. However, the only thing he was sure of was that the cold boy would not be swayed by anyone's appearance. This time the Murong family's plan was completely wrong. At the same time, in the courtyard of the South District, Emperor Murong listened to the servant's report. The flesh on his face trembled. Good, this third prince. He dares to arrest anyone. He's really been spoiled by the retired emperor. I'll go to the palace now and report to the emperor. The Murong family has been loyal for 3 generations. The third prince can arrest anyone he wants. He has to give me an explanation. I've already told the empress, the servant stammered, but the emperor just allowed it. No one knows why. Emperor Murong was stunned. The emperor allowed it? Yes. The servant looked down. Emperor Murong still could not believe it. However, he heard a lukewarm voice coming from the study room. It was gentle and elegant. "I've said it before. He's hard to deal with. Now you should know." Emperor Murong's expression changed when he heard the voice. He dismissed the servant and called out, "Young master." Chapter 352. Under the morning light, a man dressed in white sat on a wooden chair. When he saw Emperor Murong, he closed the book in his hand and slowly stood up. His eyes were indifferent. "Your Highness, it's been a long time. Please take a seat, young master." Emperor Murong was very polite when he saw the man. He even bowed and groveled. "Please enlighten me, young master. What should I do next?" The man smiled. What he said was enough to chill the surrounding air. "I heard that the emperor is dying. Why don't you take his place, your Highness?" After saying this, the man strolled into the drizzle. His figure was tall and straight and could be considered perfect. The manservants in the mansion could not help but look at him. They did not know what their Highness said to him. But that day, Emperor Murong sat in the study room in the same posture for the time it took to burn a stick of incense. After the rain, the sky was bright. After Helian Weiwei returned, she lay on the bed and fell asleep. She'd long forgotten about her promise to give third prince a bath. She didn't know which corner of her mind. Someone came in. Helian Vivian's first reaction was Qing Zhan. Qing Zhan must have come in to help her wash up. She had nothing to hide in front of Qing Zhan. He stretched lazily, got up and walked around the screen. However, when he saw the person standing outside, he was stunned. Helian Vivian was stunned. Why did His Highness appear here so early in the morning? Didn't he usually sleep until noon? Helian Weiwei realized that she was only wearing a pair of underwear on the lower half of her body. She lowered her head and looked at herself, then quickly retreated behind the screen. You wait for a moment." She couldn't express herself clearly while casually pulling out a pair of pajama pants. Baligaju walked in. His eyes were deep and there was something indescribable. Hellion Vivian put on the pajama pants. She saw that Beligage's expression was not very good. He seemed to be colder than usual. She raised her eyebrows. You came here so early in the morning. Is there something you need from me? Bailey Jiaju glanced at her. His tone was neither cold nor light. You forgot. What? Hellion Vivian felt her scalp tighten every time she talked to His Highness. Did he say that she forgot to lock herself back in? Beligaju slowly raised his injured hand. Only then did Hellion Vivian remember that she had promised to bathe His Highness yesterday. But, isn't it morning? Bailey Jiaju looked at Hellion Weiwei's expression. His voice was indifferent with a unique evil laziness. You really did forget about bathing for me. Aren't you supposed to bathe at night? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Beligaju reminded her, you didn't fulfill your promise last night. I was too busy yesterday. I'll go get some hot water now. She couldn't help it. His Highness' expression of if you don't wash up, there will be a perverted way to punish you really made Hellion Vivian unable to resist. Not to mention that she had indeed promised. In addition, His Highness always made people feel guilty when he spoke. Therefore Hellion Vivian wasn't too unwilling. She yawned lazily and scooped water with a wooden spoon with a faint smile on her face. Bailey Jiaju took an ancient book from her bookshelf, supported his chin with one hand and sat by the window, flipping through it casually. His mind was filled with the appearance of Weiwei's pair of slender and white legs from a moment ago. It's just that this was enough, but she was still wearing a slightly loose white undergarment. The red marks on her neck were clearly visible at a glance. The lapel of the garment was half covering and half covering, revealing a slender neck. Simply made people want to swish. With a sound, the man exerted force in his hand and a corner of the ancient book was missing. Beligaju acted as if nothing had happened. Chapter 353. Hellion Vivian's ears went numb for a moment. Then she smiled and got up nimbly. There are some places that your highness should wash yourself. Beligaju, who was sitting in the bathtub, looked at Hellion Vivian with deep eyes. So straightforward. Hellion Vivian couldn't believe it. Beligaju really raised his hand. Give me the bath mud. Hellion Vivian said "Og" and handed it over. Beligaju didn't take it. Instead he asked her a question that didn't make sense. Are you only wearing a bra? Yes. Hellion Vivian was not used to the layers of clothes of ancient people. Wearing a bra and a pair of loose cotton pants should be nothing. But Hellion Weiwei didn't know that when this kind of material was soaked in water, it was more beautiful than wearing nothing. Beligaju's long and narrow eyes darkened. Then he stretched out his hand as if he wanted to stand up. But because his left hand was still wrapped with a cloth, he suddenly slipped. Hellion Vivian subconsciously reached out to grab him. But she was directly pulled over by this force and fell into the bathtub. Fush. When Hellion Vivian came out again, her body was already soaked. Even the hair that reached her waist was floating with the bright red roses. He seemed to be worried that she was hurt. He held her waist with one hand from behind. There was a devilish look in his eyes. It was really dangerous. The wound almost got wet. Hellion Vivian could even feel Beligaju's lips touching her earlobe. Yes, it was indeed a little dangerous. Hellion Vivian tilted her head, trying to avoid this overly intimate action. But Beligaju pressed her into the water and slowly undid the collar of her bra. Then he narrowed his eyes and touched the red mark on her neck. Hellion Vivian was touched by his action. Even her fingers were numb. And for some reason the place where his fingers touched was especially sensitive. It does look very deep. Bailey Jiaju's deep voice rang in her ears, matching the look in his eyes at this very moment. Hellion Vivian felt an uneasy heat all over her body. She glanced at Beligaju and wanted to stand up. Don't move. Beligaju held her hand and moved closer to her. His expression was indifferent and noble. If you continue to move, I can't guarantee that I can control myself. It seemed that he was saying that she was seducing him. But Hellion Vivian still didn't move. It wasn't because she was afraid, but the temperature from that part of his body, it was obviously bulging. Hellion Vivian was shocked by that shape. Her eyes trembled. However, Bailey Jiaju was still holding her waist, his eyes slightly darkened. It was still more comfortable to hug her when she was only wearing her underwear. However, if she was not wearing anything, the touch would definitely be better. Thinking of this, all the blood in his body seemed to be boiling and all of them fused together, standing straight there. This made Beligaju move the person in his arms involuntarily. This kind of movement naturally made Helian Weiwei's entire body even more tense. However, she stiffened and turned her head to look at him in confusion. Beligaju was very calm. My legs are a little numb after staying in the same position for too long. Could it be that she was wrong? Helian Vivian saw his indifferent expression and started to doubt her guess just now. Could it be that he didn't do it on purpose? At this time, Beligaju let go of her at the right time. He looked like a very well-mannered gentleman. Go and change your clothes first. Hearing this, Helian Vivian immediately stood up. She quickly got up and walked out of the bathtub. Beligaju looked at the figure that disappeared behind the screen and raised his eyebrows. As she escaped quickly. You should at least leave the towel for me when you leave. Helian Vivian heard the faint voice behind her. She snorted and used force in her left hand. The white towel in her hand fell into the bathtub in the shape of a parabola. Bailey Jiaju looked at the towel in front of him and curled his lips into a smile. Then he stood up from the bathtub and slowly wiped the water droplets off his body. His voice was slow and cold. Qilin, come out. Master can still find out like this. Fire Qilin showed its faintly discernible figure. It lowered its head and licked its mighty big claws. Beligaju glanced at it coldly. That glance made it and its claws stiffen. Damn it, it couldn't move. How could this be? When it raised its head again, it saw that its master's eyes had a hint of golden light. Fire Qilin then realized that its master had used the body-fixing technique on it. It was instantly melancholy. Master, I didn't offend you, right? When I do something I don't like to have people watching. Beligaju's eyes were indifferent. Fire Qilin coughed softly. I didn't see really. But, Master, you did it on purpose just now, right? How could you not be able to stand and your wound was wet? You clearly wanted to drag me into the water with you. Beligaju didn't deny it. He threw the white towel in his hand to the side and walked out of the bathtub with his upper body that made people jealous. Every texture of his muscles was just right. Wait, what should I do? Is Master not planning to let me go? I was just telling the truth, hey. Fire Qilin wanted to cry but had no tears. It could only maintain its standing posture with one leg. Its tongue was still licking its claws. Its reflection in the bathtub made it look stupid no matter how you looked at it. Aha, it was ruining its image. Coincidentally, a sparrow flew over and landed on a branch. It looked at Fire Qilin with a face full of worship. What do you think Boss Qilin is doing? His posture is so strange. I don't know either. Fire Qilin heard this and immediately replied in a deep voice. I'm practicing my balancing ability. Image. It must maintain its handsome and heroic image in the eyes of cute little beasts. So you're practicing your balancing ability. The sparrows began to chirp and jump again. They looked at Fire Qilin with starry eyes. Boss is so handsome. Fire Qilin nodded naturally. His posture was very domineering. One of the sparrows jumped down and stared at Fire Qilin with its eyes wide open. Boss, can you change your posture? Let's see your other actions first. Fire Qilin. Damn. Master, help quickly undo my body freezing spell. Hearing the wailing behind him, Bailey Jiaju did not have the slightest intention of turning his head back. The corners of his mouth curved into an evil smile, his slender fingers rubbed his slightly damp black hair, bent over to pour himself a cup of tea, took a sip, then slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at Wei Wei who was standing in front of the bed. What are you doing? Helian Vivian didn't expect him to come out so soon. Chapter 354. It was probably because of his temperament. That kind of dense, cold, and ascetic temperament made it even harder for people to look away when they saw him like this. A man like this was really rare in the world. Helian Vivian was a person who cared a lot about appearances. After one glance she felt that it wasn't enough, so she took another look. With this kind of physique, if he were to film in the 21st century, countless people would definitely lick the screen. Even though Helian Vivian had seen many world-class stars, she still felt that very few people had the kind of luxurious and enchanting aristocratic aura that His Highness had. Noticing Helian Vivian's gaze, Beligaju's lips curved up. That kind of smile made him look even more handsome. Helian Vivian took another look at him, but coincidentally met his gaze as well. It was as if he was deliberately catching her. For a moment Helian Vivian seemed to hear the stagnation in the air. Why are you looking at me? Beligaju asked with a smile. Hellion Vivian. We were clearly looking at each other. Why did it seem like I was peeping at you? Baligaju looked at her expression. His unsatisfied mood improved again. The corners of his mouth curved up, and his entire body emitted a unique charm. Hellion Vivian felt that this person was constantly using his handsome man to trick her. Fortunately, she had better self-control. If she had pounced on him— Wait a minute, why did she want to pounce on him? Woman, don't suppress your natural instincts. Yuan Ming's evil voice sounded. You have less than 5 days left. The closer it is to dual cultivation, the more your body is out of your control. Why do you have to work so hard? If you want it, then do it. Hellion Wei Wei didn't pay attention to Yuan Ming and directly stuffed him back into the celestial boundary space. She looked at Bailey Jiaju's apathetic and narrow eyes and sat on the wooden chair with her legs slightly crossed. She drank a mouthful of tea and then said, I want to go buy some clothes. Buy clothes? Baligaju didn't expect to get such an answer. The hand that was drying his hair obviously paused. Hellion Vivian nodded and thought to herself, it's all because of you, the main culprit. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to specially buy a high-collared robe in the middle of summer. You really should buy more clothes to wear. Baligaju glanced at her again. His gaze was indifferent and noble, like a domineering CEO looking at a homeless person on the streets. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What kind of look was that? He was also very rich. Let's go. Let's go shopping now. Baligaju put on the robe and his posture was as smooth as flowing water. Hellion Vivian didn't know how to react. Shadow. Baligaju called out the shadow guards accompanying him. Go and get ready. And Ying turned his head and replied, yes. Actually, I can go by myself. You're so busy. Hellion Vivian smiled at Baligaju. She was as smart as usual. Shopping was so troublesome, people like the royal family definitely wouldn't like it. Unexpectedly, Baligaju only gave her 3 words. No. Hellion Vivian. Why not? I really can't agree with your taste. Baligaju took the lead and walked out. There it is again. That cold and condescending gaze. It really made people want to beat him up. Hellion Vivian told herself to get used to it. After all, in the eyes of a certain highness, she was just a 2-legged prey. When Bailey Jiaju turned around, what he saw was Hellion Wei Wei's creased eyebrows with a conflicted look on her face. Immediately, his thin lips curved into a smile. Hellion Vivian silently ridiculed. Sure enough, a certain highness interest was something a mortal like her couldn't understand. It couldn't be more perverted. However, looking at his clothes, she knew that Baligaju had good taste. It wasn't a bad idea to bring such a man out shopping. Before we set off, let's eat something first. Hellion Vivian rubbed her stomach. She had been hungry for a long time. Right now, she only wanted to eat the fragrant white rice. It would be even better if it could be paired with a plate of spiced beef. Baligaju didn't look at her with that discriminatory gaze this time. He asked someone to prepare the meal. The 2 of them didn't eat in the house. Instead, they ate in the pavilion in the courtyard. The wine and dishes were served, and each dish was overflowing with fragrance. Hellion Vivian ate with satisfaction. Royal family didn't want to eat. She basically finished all the food that was served to her. There was no sense of discomfort. Both of them were very lazy people. Their good upbringing could be seen at the dining table. It was just that one ate like a poster while the other was more natural. She wasn't picky about food. They complemented each other. It was rare to see a girl like Hellion Vivian who ate so much. She wasn't pretentious and ate whatever was fed to her. This made Baligaju smile even more. He felt that she saved him a lot of trouble in terms of feeding. After the 2 of them finished eating, they walked side by side toward the gate of the academy when they saw that it was almost time. Hellion Vivian also began to notice that the number of shadow guards following Baligaju was more than 10 times more than usual. Although they didn't come out and hid well, Hellion Vivian could still sense the difference. Now that the power in the imperial court was unstable, there would be a lot of trouble after His Highness' identity was exposed in the White Academy. In addition, he had caught Murong Hongti yesterday. Empress Murong would definitely not let it go. Now that he thought about it, His Highness probably had more enemies than him. Women played with tricks while men played with military power. There would definitely be some movement in the Murong mansion. It would probably be in 1 or 2 days. Hellion Vivian thought of this. She paused and said, I'm already doing the firearms you mentioned last time. I'll be out in 2 days. Baligaju nodded faintly. He looked at Hellion Vivian with a deep meaning that made her scalp numb. You seem to be very good at this. Hellion Vivian paused. Fortunately, Baligaju didn't continue to ask. He looked at her faintly. What about the name? Hellion Vivian put on a serious face. I'm still thinking. The main thing is what kind of name he wants. Doesn't the royal realize how difficult it is to serve him? It was very clear that His Highness, who had always lived in the clouds, did not have this kind of feeling because the people below him had to use all their brains just to guess his thoughts. They were eager to be able to serve this master, so how could they dare to find fault with His Highness? The good thing about Baligaju was that he had a good family education. Although this kind of education was just a disguise, it still made people feel that he was very polite. Where do you want to go later? Hellion Vivian was casual. Just find a cloth store. As long as she could find one with a collar to cover the marks on her neck. Chapter 355. Baligaju asked again, how much do you want? Hellion Vivian calculated according to the price in ancient times. It was summer now, so there was no need for expensive fur coats. A normal robe would cost about 10 taels, and the most expensive one would cost no more than 50 taels. She thought that 70 taels would be enough, so she directly reported it to Baligaju, around 70 taels or a little more. In order to prove that she was also rich, Hellion Vivian emphasized the last part. Baligaju raised an eyebrow. 70 taels shouldn't be enough to buy an inner robe. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. I meant a set. Baligaju looked at her for a while and frowned. So you're that poor? Hellion Vivian. She clearly asked for the most expensive one. The best clothes for the young ladies of aristocratic families only cost about 50 taels. Why did she always feel like she was a nouveau riche who had never seen the world in front of His Highness? Hurry up and tell her that this must be an illusion. Baligaju lowered his eyes and looked at her. If you're short on money in the future, you can go to Shadow to get it. I'll help you choose what you want to wear later, then you can try it on. Was he disdainful of her clothes? Hellion Vivian wanted to explain herself. But Baligaju looked at her like he was looking at a stray cat, so she really couldn't explain. Even Hellion Wei herself started to doubt herself. Was she really that poor? Fortunately, there were still normal people. Shadow stood beside her and whispered to her. His Highness is used to using good things since he was young. It's not just good things, it's probably the best thing in the world. Hellion Vivian already knew that this man was raised in gold, so she didn't care. Shadow had prepared the best carriage. He walked to the front of the carriage, put his finger on his left arm, and bowed respectfully to Hellion Vivian and Baligaju. Ever since His Highness announced his identity, he didn't care about leave requests anymore. The teachers did not even have time to line up to see him off. Originally, this student was already a headache for the teachers. Now that they knew his identity, the teachers felt even more troubled. There was only one reason. They really didn't dare to control such a student. Even if Bailey Jiaju did not reveal his identity as a prince, he could make the teachers involuntarily hand over the leave slip with just one glance. Hearing that Baligaju was going to take Hellion Vivian shopping, even Eunuch Sun specially rushed over from the imperial palace to meet them at the foot of the mountain. Along the way, he looked at Baligaju with watery eyes. His Highness actually knew to come out with a woman to stroll around the city. If this was in the past, Eunuch Sun wouldn't even dare to think about it. So she was still the eldest Mississippi. Oh no, she should be called Princess Consort now. Princess Consort still had a way. Thus, as soon as Hellion Vivian got off the carriage, Eunuch Sun stuffed a bunch of banknotes into her hands. Princess Consort, buy more. If it's not enough, this servant still has more. I'll wait outside. You and His Highness take your time shopping, take your time. Hellion Vivian looked at the banknotes in her hands. Each banknote was worth 100 taels. There were about 70 to 80 banknotes in total. If she calculated it like this, she really didn't have enough money. Baligaju seemed to be used to it. In his eyes, the banknotes were like white paper. There was no difference. On this point, Hellion Wei really admired His Highness. He treated money like nothing. He couldn't do it. What she loved the most was the color of silver. Hellion Vivian blew the banknotes in her hands. Her lips curved into a roguish smile. When the time came, she would return how much was left. She, Hellion Vivian, loved money, but she didn't take advantage of anyone. The main thing was whether the clothes were comfortable or not. Whether they looked good or not, the amount of money wasn't the main point. Let's go. Beligaju brushed his robes. His voice was as indifferent as usual. He freed one hand and took her in his arms. Hellion Vivian was also generous. She didn't forget that Eunuch's son was looking behind them. He would definitely report to the retired emperor. Sometimes it was necessary to show affection. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian looked back. She saw Eunuch's son raise his hands and cheer her on. She suddenly had the urge to facepalm and sigh. However, the place that Bailey Jiaju brought her to was indeed extraordinarily good. She could guess a thing or two just by looking at the charm of the main hall. In addition, as soon as she stepped into this place, she was greeted by swaying green bamboos, which added a touch of artistic conception. Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and looked over. She saw 4 golden words on the horizontal board. Imperial cloth. Beligaju brought her in. The female master seemed to know Beligaju. After seeing him, her eyes lit up. This subordinate just received the news from Shadow and was shocked. I didn't expect that master would really come. It was master, not his highness? It seemed that this imperial cloth was opened by Beligaju himself. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. No wonder the people of Dragon War Empire said that the world's first royal family was rich enough to rival a country. Even this cloth shop was more exquisite than others. Looking at the robes that the master was wearing, it was made of the best silk. Hellion Vivian wasn't someone who had never seen the market. Naturally, she could recognize what was good. Presumably this is the princess. The master looked at Hellion Vivian. Originally, she wanted to praise her beauty, but after seeing Hellion Vivian's face, she could only change her words. This subordinate pays respect to the princess. Hellion Vivian waved her hand. There's no need for these formalities outside. I want to choose a robe. Do you have any recommendations? The master looked at Hellion Vivian again. The princess's figure is good. She has the right places in the right places. She won't be ugly no matter what she wears. The master was speaking the truth. Putting aside the princess's face, this figure was simply the best. Hellion Wei naturally knew about this. When she first transmigrated, she felt that the original owner of this body must have thought that she was too young and had developed too well. That was why her back was a little hunched and her breasts were a little receding. She deliberately adjusted this aspect. Speaking of which, she was just a young girl. It was always right to drink more milk. While the two of them were talking, Beligaju's finger slightly picked out a set of ancient nightgown. That nightgown was white satin. The sleeves were wide wings. It was gentle and beautiful, but it didn't lose its free and easy nature. It had a cold and elegant taste. Hellion Vivian also looked good, but, I'm here to choose a robe. Beligaju didn't speak. He just looked at her quietly. Those deep black eyes were reminding her. She almost forgot that she was a person without taste now. She must accept a certain highness choice. I'll try it. Anyway, she liked this style. She could look at the robe later. Hellion Vivian took the nightgown and was led into the inner room by the master. Chapter 356. Princess Consort really has a good figure. The old master looked at the woman in front of him. It was very difficult for people to wear this nightgown because of its length. Some women, no matter how beautiful they were, would feel awkward wearing this as if they had stolen an adult's clothes. Only Hellion Vivian could wear that lazy look to the extreme. Even the old master himself thought that wearing this kind of nightgown would make people feel distant. But Hellion Vivian was different. Just like the old master said, her figure was very good. So when the pure white clothes were worn on her, not only did it not have that kind of dull feeling, it was exquisite and delicate. Her temperament was like jade, but it also had a free and easy feeling. Come here. Beligaju raised his eyes to look at her. His legs were slightly crossed as he sat on the wooden chair. His body was elegantly and lazily leaning back. There was a water bottle by his hand. His side profile was handsome and cold, and his domineering aura was at its peak. Wasn't the light here very good? He wanted to look closer. Hellion Vivian suspiciously walked over. But she didn't expect that when they were almost face to face, Beligaju still felt that it wasn't enough and grabbed her arm to pull her closer. The old master was very smart. Seeing this scene, he quickly closed the door for the two of them and then hurriedly retreated. Hellion Vivian was still frowning. Bailey Jiaju had already pressed her down on his long thighs. His fingers very naturally probed into her robe. Hellion Vivian immediately froze. She never thought that things would develop like this. It looked like he just found a place where there were only the two of them so that he could properly bully her. That handsome face came closer, so close that she could feel his breath. Do you want the people outside to hear? That hoarse voice echoed in her ears. The tone was so slow that it was almost a whisper. Be good. You know, I don't want to use any tricks on you. This didn't count as using any tricks? Hellion Vivian wanted to move away from him, but just as she moved, his broad palm quickly reached over and tightly gripped her arm, forcing her to be unable to move. In the end, even if he didn't use his hands, she couldn't move. His Highness must have done something to her again. There seems to be something missing. Baligaju looked at Hellion Vivian, who was in his arms. Then he picked up the teapot that was filled with warm water and slowly poured all the water on Hellion Weiwei's body. Although the temperature of the water remained the same, it still made Hellion Vivian shiver. She raised her eyebrows and looked at the man in front of her. She shouted in a low voice, Baligaju, but he acted as if he didn't hear it. His big hand pressed down on the long leg that she wanted to lift up. With a faint smile, he approached her shining eyes. I knew that this color suits you very well. As he spoke, he lifted her up and carried her straight into the inner room, where there was a 1-meter-tall bronze mirror. Hellion Vivian didn't dare to look at herself in the bronze mirror. Her wet white nightgown stuck to her body, faintly revealing the red cloth inside. Her slender legs stood on the fine carpet, and her white toes were set off by the black carpet, which made her look a little charming. Baligaju stood behind her, one hand around her waist, the other caressing her neck. His noble and indifferent side profile had a rare devilish aura, and his white teeth were slightly exposed. He was like a vampire count in the Middle Ages, thinking about how to suck the perfect prey when he found it. Hellion Vivian didn't know if it was because of this position that he could see everything, but the stimulation seemed to be twice as intense as usual. He held her firmly in his arms and kissed her from her ear to her neck. The strong masculine scent and the burning aroma of wine slowly numbed her body, causing her to panic and want to struggle. However, he held her wrists with one hand, while his other hand instinctively went to her chest and messed around. He easily pulled off a few buttons, revealing her bright red underwear. She didn't know when the nightgown was half open, but Baligaju still refused to let her go. His thin lips rubbed back and forth on the place where the red mark had been, as if to confirm that it was his exclusive brand. Suddenly, he raised the corner of his mouth slightly and bit that place again. Since you didn't help your husband clean when I took a bath, you should pay it back now. Baligaju's actions became more and more excessive, as if he knew that she couldn't resist at this time, and kissed Hellion Vivian heavily and lightly on her belly band as if he was punishing her, but it was as gentle as spring water. Hellion Vivian was forced to bear the heat from him, and her back was tightly pressed against him. In front of her was a bronze mirror that only made her feel ashamed, and her long legs were weak as if they weren't on the ground at all. The body in youth was so sensitive, and recently so Hellion Vivian couldn't control herself at all. Her fingers pressed on the man's hand, and it was unknown whether she was resisting or wanting him to continue. This kind of action provoked even more passion from Bailey Jiaju. His scalding big palm continuously kneaded her softness through the belly band. Do you like the clothes that I've chosen for you? Are you here to help me choose clothes? Hellion Vivian's whole body was losing strength, and she could only bite her thin lips fiercely to stop her voice from trembling. You used the body-fixing spell on me. Baligaju used force and smiled lightly, making him look like a jade-like noble young master. But it was a pity that his eyes weren't clean enough, and were dyed with a deep demonic nature. What? Do you want me to undo it for you? Hellion Vivian nodded, but her voice was much hoarser than usual. I can help you undo it. Baligaju's tone was very light, but the content of his words was, but I need your hand to complete the work you should have done. Work? Who would treat this kind of thing as work? Hellion Vivian's face was burning hot, and she wanted to use her own strength to undo the body-fixing spell. If you don't want to or break through the body-fixing spell yourself. Baligaju's thin lips leaned against her ear, then I will use other methods to pay you back. How could Hellion Vivian listen to him? Her fingers moved slightly, wanting to resist. So naughty. Bailey Jiaju directly held her hand in his palm, then he pulled her hand and slowly moved it towards that place. Hellion Vivian's face and ears were red, and even her breathing was a little hot. You let go? You want me to let go? How is that possible? When you opened the door today you deliberately dressed like that and you still want me to let go. Beligaju laughed and sweat slid down his handsome face, dripping onto her snow-white neck. Chapter 357. The old master handed over the bag in his hand. As he spoke he also turned to look at Wei Wei. A few rays of light flashed through the depths of his eyes. Thinking about the things that His Highness wanted her to purchase, he was more or less somewhat astonished. However, she had just seen Miss Yun in another room. Miss Yun had come together with the second miss of the Hellion family. Miss Yun also told her some things about His Highness. Miss Yun asked her to help put in a good word in front of His Highness. His Highness seemed to have not forgotten that she left at will. But what was the situation now? Not only did His Highness personally bring the princess to the imperial family, but he also asked her to specially bring the custom-made things. She originally thought that those things were for Miss Yun, but now it seemed that she was wrong. Hellion Vivian saw that the master had been looking at her, so she tilted her head and smiled. From the beginning she felt that the identity of this master was not ordinary. Because there were definitely very few people who could make Beligaju treat them with patience. But when facing this master, although His Highness was still very indifferent compared to usual, he was not so angry. As if noticing Hellion Vivian's gaze, Beligaju casually introduced her. This is wet nurse Sue from the palace. Hellion Vivian knew that generally in the imperial family, the wet nurse was even closer to the princes than their mother. But this master was a little too old. What nonsense are you thinking? Wet nurse Sue took care of imperial father. Beligaju glanced at Hellion Vivian indifferently. Hellion Vivian always felt that she was like a transparent person in front of His Highness. He knew what she was thinking. What about your Highness, wet nurse? I don't have a wet nurse. Beligaju's voice was still calm and indifferent. Hellion Vivian did not understand. Doesn't every prince have a wet nurse? Beligaju grunted and said in a light tone, Imperial mother was busy fighting for favor at that time and forgot about me, so she didn't hire a wet nurse for me. Hellion Vivian did not expect such an answer. It was not that she forgot to hire a wet nurse. It was that she forgot about Beligaju. To be forgotten by one's own mother, that feeling must be very uncomfortable, right? Hellion Vivian glanced at Beligaju. The side of the man's face still did not change, except that the smile at the corner of his mouth was tinged with a bit of mockery. She thought that he grew up in a pot of gold. But she never thought that there might be cruelty in the gold pot. In fact, after careful analysis, he was obsessed with cleanliness, perfect, and had a control over everything that was different from ordinary people. It could be seen that His Highness did not have a good childhood. Otherwise he would not have formed such a character. On the surface he looked very holy, but in fact he was black to the bone. He was the same. When she was young, someone told her that she should be a gentle girl. That way someone would know how to feel sorry for her and protect her. She also wanted to be protected. But in the end she found that all of this was nonsense. She had to make herself stronger. Only by becoming stronger could she survive. Including when her stepmother poured dirty water on her and slandered her as a thief. She knew that in this world no one would protect her. So she looked very approachable, but she was more cold-blooded than anyone else. To put it simply, she was selfish. She was so selfish that she would not completely trust anyone. She liked to leave a way out for everything. They were the same kind of people. In the eyes of the world they must be bad to the bone. No correction. He was bad to the bone. His Highness did a good job on the surface, although that man was the one who was really bad to the bone. Give me your hand. Beligaju took the exquisitely packaged bag. Hellion Vivian guessed that there should be something like jewelry in it. After all, rich people like to give these things, not to mention a rich person like His Highness. However, even someone as smart as Hellion Vivian could not completely guess Beligaju's thoughts. It was indeed something that bordered on jewelry. The workmanship was very exquisite. The texture of pure silver was indeed enchanting black. Could even emit a faint light under the sun. But could someone come and tell her? Why did His Highness give her a cat collar? This was definitely a cat collar. In the 21st century she had seen this thing in many pet shops. Although it did not look as thin as this one, it was not as beautiful as this one. There was basically no difference in shape. Hellion Vivian wanted to laugh again. Even 10,000 alpacas galloping past was not enough to describe her current mood. Right now she just wanted to shake Beligaju awake and ask him, "What are you doing?" Did he think that after raising a pet he was afraid that the pet would not be obedient and had to wear a collar? Did he need to write down his contact information and engrave the owner of the collar? As it turned out, Hellion Vivian had found the right clues and could still follow His Highness's thoughts. Because she found that on the pure silver collar, there was really a word engraved in a flamboyant style. Jew. Hellion Vivian. Beligaju would not give people a chance to refuse when he gave them a gift. He saw that she was staring at her palm for a long time, but had no intention of wearing it. His slender fingers directly reached out, opened the mysterious ice tungsten, and clasped it around Hellion Vivian's neck. Hellion Vivian's neck was beautiful, thin and white. Now with such a black color even the fragile capillaries could be seen. Beligaju paused for a moment. Without hesitation he leaned forward and was about to bite her as if there was no one around. This time Hellion Vivian did not let him succeed. She dodged and stood up. After meeting Wet Nurse Sue's surprised gaze, she smiled lazily and did not feel uncomfortable. It was just that there was an extra thing on her neck. Looking at it in the mirror she looked quite pretty, a little like a dark angel. She had to admit that His Highness did have good taste. But no matter how good it was still a cat collar. Who would wear such a thing for people? We cats don't wear this either. Little White's cold voice came from the fantasy space. Unless it is a completely tamed spiritual beast, it will do whatever its master says. Yuan Ming raised the corner of his mouth. She is not far from being tamed. Let me think, it seems that there are still 4 more days. 4 more days until her dual cultivation day. You can shut up now. Hellion Wei Wei's tone was neither fast nor slow as she kicked these 2 guys out of her own consciousness. Then she reached out and touched the collar on her neck. When she looked up she saw 2 very familiar figures standing outside the courtyard. Those 2 people were not just anyone. One was Yun Biluo and the other was Hellion Jiaoer, who always wanted to frame her. Although it was just a flash in front of her eyes, Hellion Vivian was sure that the 2 figures that just appeared were those 2 people. Wasn't this a place where only the royal family could appear? How did Yun Biluo come in? Chapter 358. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused for a moment. What's wrong? When Beligaju followed her gaze there was no one outside. Hellion Vivian didn't think it was a big deal. She yawned lazily. Nothing. As she spoke she wanted to take off the collar on her neck. Bailey Jiaju pressed down on her hand. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but curve into a faint arc as he laughed in a low voice. He glanced at Hellion Wei Wei's neck with admiration. You really are suited to wear this. Hellion Vivian. Should she say thank you? No matter what, she should take it off first. Looking at her actions, Beligaju smiled coldly. You better think carefully before you take it off. Otherwise, if I'm not happy, I might take Qingzhan away from you. Hellion Vivian looked at him, amused. Qingzhan is yours. You care about her. Beligaju pulled her hand over and played with it in his palm. His voice was so indifferent that it hit the nail on the head. Hellion Vivian's fingers moved the collar again. But don't you feel awkward looking at it? Do I look like I'm wearing this? You don't. Beligaju frowned and looked at Hellion Vivian as if he was looking at a disobedient pet. With helplessness and displeasure he said, I wanted to make a chain for you directly. It would be best if you could lock it up, but you don't seem to like it. Hellion Vivian. No one would like it. She really wanted to flip the table. Can't you give me a normal gift? This collar is not bad. Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian lightly. You like it very much. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. When did I say that I like it? Didn't you look at yourself in the bronze mirror for a long time just now? Beligaju's matter-of-fact tone made Hellion Vivian want to vomit blood. His Highness's inhuman ability to misunderstand was really impossible to communicate with. Hellion Wei Wei felt a sense of defeat. Beligaju patted her head. Don't be embarrassed. Hellion Vivian just wanted to laugh at him. Then she saw a delicate and beautiful light flash in front of her eyes. In the next moment she saw a ring of the same color in his hand. The ring was shaped like a T and it seemed to be of the same series as the collar on her neck. He calmly took the ring and put it on his little finger. It was obvious that he was the only one who could undo the collar on her neck. Hellion Vivian, what the hell kind of territorial awareness is this? Wet Nurse Sue, who was standing next to them, couldn't help but smile at Hellion Vivian. His Highness is really good to the Princess Consort. I'm afraid that this set of things won't be able to be made again in this world. Hellion Wei Wei believed this sentence because mysterious ferrotungsten was very rare. To make such a delicate piece of mysterious ferrotungsten, it would cost a lot of money. But no matter how rare it was, a collar was still a collar. Yes, it was the best collar in the world. Hellion Vivian thought as she looked in Baligaju's direction. She saw the man squinting his starry eyes under the light as he looked at her neck. A light flashed in his eyes and his light-colored lips curved slightly, looking as elegant as jade. Forget it, it looks pretty on her anyway, so she'll just wear it. Hellion Vivian had always been open-minded about this kind of thing, so she chatted with Wet Nurse Sue for a while with a smile on her face. The collar was actually not bad, at least it could cover the marks on her neck. Baligaju sat on the wooden chair and listened, with an ancient book in his hand and his chin on his left hand. He regained his usual elegance. He was dressed casually in a white and green robe. He had a tall and straight figure, a noble and elegant handsome face and a low-key and profound temperament, but his expression was as calm as usual. Wet Nurse Sue also deliberately lowered her voice. She held the clothes in her hands and stopped talking about the workmanship. She felt a little relieved as she looked at Hellion Wei Wei and said, "There are some things that I don't know if I should say. If I've said something wrong, please forgive me, Princess Consort." Hellion Vivian put the clothes aside. "Is Master Sue going to talk about Yun Biluo?" Wet Nurse Sue's fingers paused and then she laughed. "Nothing can escape the eyes of the Princess Consort. Everyone said that Miss Hellion was a real woman without beauty or brains, but in Wet Nurse Sue's opinion, Miss Hellion was a person with good eyes and a clear heart." The corners of Hellion Wei Wei's mouth curled up. "Master Sue, I'm not interested in her affairs. If you want to say something you can tell Bailey Jiaju directly." Wet Nurse Sue was stunned. She did not expect such an answer. She thought that an ungenerous woman would be angry. She also thought that the Princess Consort knew everything, so she wanted to find someone to discuss how to deal with Miss Yun. But now it seemed that Hellion Vivian's reaction was neither of the two. Has the Princess Consort never thought about how to deal with Miss Yun? Wet Nurse Sue stayed in the palace for a long time. It could be said that she watched the royal family and Yun Biluo grow up. Hellion Vivian smiled. "Deal with her?" Wet Nurse Sue quickly said, "Princess Consort, I don't mean anything else. His Highness has been a loner since he was a child and there are few things that he wants. Previously I thought that His Highness chose the Princess Consort because of the retired Emperor's order, but now it seems that His Highness really cares about the Princess Consort. But I want to do you a favor. If one day His Highness wants to choose a secondary consort, please give Miss Yun a chance." Hellion Vivian looked at Wet Nurse Sue and smiled. It seems that Wet Nurse Sue really takes care of Miss Yun as her own child. Wet Nurse Sue knew that her request was too much. "Princess Consort, don't be angry." "I'm not angry." Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. "Every mother will do something that they don't want to do for their child. But I have the right to refuse this kind of thing. If Baligaju really wants to choose a secondary consort, I won't interfere with who he chooses. I won't speak for anyone nor will I bully anyone. So Wet Nurse Sue, you can rest assured about this. When the time came she would leave directly. She wouldn't care about this kind of thing." Wet Nurse Sue's hands and feet stiffened unnaturally. "I'm too much to ask the Princess Consort this kind of request." This time Hellion Vivian didn't deny it. Instead she glanced at her. "Since you think it's too much, don't mention it next time. I don't know if Baligaju will choose a secondary consort, but do you think he will allow what Wet Nurse Sue is doing now? The Princess Consort knows His Highness well." Wet Nurse Sue lowered her eyes with a smile on her face. She felt relieved and sad. "Miss Yun is a little too wishful thinking. I've been with His Highness for so many years, but I've never seen him smile like that. Most of the time he just sneered. Not to mention taking the Princess Consort to visit the imperial family like this. As servants, no matter how long we've been with His Highness, we always feel that accompanying the monarch is like accompanying a tiger. His Highness has probably noticed it, so no one can really get close to His Highness. From the beginning to the end His Highness has always been alone." Chapter 359. Hearing Wet Nurse Sue's words, Hellion Vivian put aside the clothes in her hands and subconsciously glanced at Baligaju, who was sitting outside. She found that his eyes were closed. His long eyelashes and noble and elegant handsome face were bathed in the light, making him look otherworldly. This kind of thing depends on his decision in the end. Hellion Vivian retracted her eyes. Her voice was neither high nor low, as calm as water. Wet nurse, if you feel sorry for others in the future, don't tell me. It's meaningless. Wet nurse Sue paused and her eyes dimmed. However, she did not lose her sense of duty. She just bowed and continued to respectfully watch Hellion Vivian choose. However, Yun Biluo did not expect that person to bring someone to the royal linen shop. She thought that she knew His Highness better than anyone else. But now, Yun Biluo looked at the white flowers in full bloom outside the window. Her clear eyes darkened and her fingers, which were hidden under her long sleeves, slightly clenched. However, Hellion Jiaoer sat beside her and asked indirectly, "Was that His Highness just now? Why did His Highness bring Hellion Vivian to the royal linen shop?" Yun Biluo knew why Hellion Jiaoer asked this question. Before they came to the royal linen shop, she had told Hellion Jiaoer the purpose of the shop. It was specially provided for the royal family. Whether it was robes or scarves, everything was custom-made. It was rare to find another cloth shop like this one in the capital city. Most importantly, only the royal family could enter the royal linen shop. But she was different. She was His Highness's personal maid and the only woman who was brought into the royal linen shop by His Highness. But now she was not the only one. Furthermore, she was only able to enter back then because she was a servant girl. However, Hellion Vivian was different. She was really brought in by His Highness himself. Even His Highness was waiting for her to choose clothes. Even if it was for the sake of dealing with the retired emperor, His Highness seemed to have gone too far. At the thought of this, Yun Biluo could not help but cut her finger. The pain brought her back to reality and she smiled at the Hellion Jiaoer. "You have to be realistic when you're acting." "Are you saying that His Highness is acting?" Hellion Jiaoer's eyes lit up. "It's possible. I saw the retired emperor's shadow guards following them all the way." Yun Biluo answered absent-mindedly, but she still felt uneasy. It was probably because His Highness had not forgiven him. Ever since she appeared, she had never spoken to His Highness alone. Therefore no one knew what he was thinking. However, there was one thing that Yun Biluo was very clear about. It could not go on like this, Jiaoer. Yun Biluo smiled gently and said in a pleasant voice, "You can't go to the academy and you're locked up at home. Aren't you bored?" Hellion Jiaoer was also good at pretending to be pitiful. She laughed at herself. "How can I not be bored? But Sister Yun, you know that I annoyed His Highness because of Hellion Vivian last time. If it weren't for father and mother, I'm afraid I would have married that eunuch Huayan. Now that Hellion Vivian has someone backing her up, I don't know what she will do to me when she sees me." Miss Wei Wei is indeed a little bold. Yun Biluo took a sip of tea as she spoke. "Just the news that I've heard is enough to shock me." Hellion Jiaoer was smart enough to know that Yun Biluo was implying something. For the past few days they had been talking about Hellion Vivian, that little bitch. Especially her father, who could not wait for that bitch to make a mistake and lose the right to inherit the family. If there was really any news at this time, it should be able to help her father. "Sister Yun, do you know what happened?" Hellion Jiaoer lowered her voice. "Tell me, I won't tell anyone." Su Yenemo had never lived such a life. Everywhere she went, people looked at her strangely. She desperately needed something to prove herself, so even her words and actions were a little ingratiating. She could not see it, but she felt that it was right. Chapter 360. Hellion Guangyao was irritated to see her like this. Especially when his wife greeted others warmly, he would feel embarrassed. Initially, when he married Su Yenemo, some people in the capital looked down on him. Later on, when his power gradually increased, people began to forget about this matter. No matter how good the Su family was, it could not be compared to the Hellion family, which was a real aristocratic family. Some temperaments required time to develop. In the past, he thought that Su Yenemo was the kind of woman that men needed the most. She was gentle and knew what expression to show at the right time. But after all, she was just a pretty girl from a humble family. This kind of pretty girl from a humble family was indeed pitiful when she was young. But now it was still the same. Hellion Guangyao could not stand it anymore. He thought of the lovely girl he had outside and felt that Su Yenemo was clingy. Su Yenemo did not want to argue with Hellion Guangyao outside. She knew that this woman's biggest taboo was to argue with a man in public. Her tone softened subconsciously. "Old master, I am anxious because of Jiao Erb." Didn't I advise you to wait until I get the right to inherit the Hellion family? It won't be too late for you to do these things then. Hellion Guang Yao's attitude was mixed with annoyance. Su Yenmo was naturally unhappy. Hellion Guang Yao glanced at her again and said, "You go back and think about it first. When you've made up your mind you can come out again." As he spoke, he called for the servant who was following at the side. "Send Madam back." "Yes." The servant lowered his eyes and walked to Su Yenmo respectfully. "Madam, let's go back first." Su Yenmo looked at Hellion Guang Yao's back. Her lowered eyes flashed with a trace of resentment. Her hands clenched a little, but she had to follow the servant back first. Hellion Jiaoer was waiting in the side room. Looking at Su Yenmo's gloomy expression, she was not sure what had happened. She had just mentioned Hellion Vivian. Su Yenmo threw the tea in her hand and said, "Don't mention that little bastard's name in front of me." The three of them had fallen to this state because of that little bastard. She couldn't wait to strangle that little bastard to death. "Mother, listen to me. This time we will make sure that little bitch will never be able to make a comeback." Hellion Jiaoer whispered into Su Yenmo's ear and told her everything that had happened. Su Yenmo's eyes lit up when she heard that. She thought for a while and ordered the servant, "Go to the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs and get Lord Li Meng here." Li Meng was a distant relative of the Su family in Jiangnan. He had just been transferred to the capital, and his promotion depended on the Su family's care. Prime Minister Su had arranged for him to work in the Ministry of Civil Affairs, so that the Su family could use him one day. Of course, Su Yenmo would not let go of this opportunity. When it was time to order people around, she would order them around. After Li Ji received the news from the servant, he immediately came to the general's residence. In the past he had helped Madame Su with a lot of things. In the past, when those rumors about the eldest daughter of the Hellion family were spread, it was all him who helped infiltrate the officialdom. When those officials heard about it, they naturally would not allow their sons to marry such an ugly hedonistic girl into the residence. Moreover, it was the Murong residence. That was why Hellion Vivian was divorced, and it was partly because of him. However, after thinking about it for a long time, he still could not understand why this Hellion Vivian suddenly became the third princess consort. Later on, he heard that it was because the third prince wanted to deal with the retired emperor. However, even if it was to deal with the retired emperor, he should have married that attractive cousin of his. Why did he choose that ugly girl? He muttered in his heart but did not dare to ask. He only listened attentively to Su Yenmo's instructions. "Go and investigate this place." Su Yenmo gave him an address. Li Ji looked at the address written on the rice paper. It was just a village outside the capital, so he did not pay much attention to it. "Go and investigate this place tonight. If you find any weapons, bring them back to the yamen." Su Yenmo took a sip and said calmly, "This is like a pie falling from the sky for you." "A big deal for a pie falling from the sky?" Li Ji did not understand. "I hope Madame Su can give me some pointers. Mass production of weapons outside the city, what are their intentions?" Su Yenmo laughed. "As long as you use the excuse of catching rebels and thieves, you can seize the weapons and catch the people. Think about it, won't you have done a great service?" After hearing that, Li Ji's eyes lit up. "But I don't know who has the guts to mass-produce weapons. Who else could it be?" Su Yenmo laughed coldly. "Does she think that she can do whatever she wants now that she's a princess consort? She started the martial arts world and no one really cares about her. However, she's too wild and never knows how to be satisfied. She's definitely up to no good by mass-producing weapons in such a secretive manner." Li Ji gasped and hesitated. It's the third princess consort's? It's hers, so what?" Su Yenmo's face darkened and she looked at Li Ji coldly. Then she blew on her nails and laughed. "It seems that I've been worrying too much. With such a great service, the first thing I thought of was my relatives. If you don't dare to do it, then let's forget about it. It's not like the Ministry of War can't get the news." Li Ji wiped his sweat and hurriedly said, Don't. This official was too slow to react. However, the third prince. In the end, the one he didn't dare to provoke was that godlike man. Everyone in the capital knows why the royal family married that girl. Do you think the royal family will care about that girl after such a thing happened? Su Yenmo took another sip of tea. Since ancient times, only the imperial court has the right to mass-produce such a large number of weapons to prevent people from secretly raising an army and plotting to usurp the throne. If the royal family protects Hellion Vivian when the time comes, then they will miss out even more. Think about it, which emperor would allow his son to have so many weapons in private? The royal family is so smart, they can't wait to hide in this kind of situation. Why would they speak up for Hellion Vivian? Moreover, when the prince reaches the age of concubine with Jiao Heir's looks, she will definitely stand out at that time. Think about it carefully whether you want to do it or not. Li Ji had always been a scheming person. Although his work ability was not very good, his mind was flexible and he could always take the opportunity to climb up. It could be said that for so many years he had completely relied on this distant aunt of his in the capital. And the reason why his aunt lived so comfortably was mostly because her daughter was very famous in the entire capital. Although there were some problems now with his aunt's means, he believed that it would not take long to solve it. Chapter 361. Moreover, how could the young lady of the Hellion family be compared to an ugly girl who was banished from the family? Li Meng had a plan and immediately agreed to Su Yanmo's words. I'll go back now and send someone to keep an eye on her. He did not believe that he could not catch Hellion Vivian by keeping an eye on her all the time. Li Meng's status was low and he could not mix in the real circle of the capital. Naturally, he did not know that the boss of Profound Heaven did not rely on luck. He only thought that Hellion Vivian was an inexperienced person. He could not wait to get hold of Hellion Vivian's weakness and drag her down. He could use this opportunity to gain merit and curry favor with Hellion Guangyao. As far as he knew, the Hellion family would have a clan meeting soon and the successor would be announced at the meeting. Hellion Guangyao could not wait to see what would happen to Hellion Vivian. If he did well this time, not only would he be able to gain favor with Madame Su, but he would also be able to get along with Hellion Guangyao. There would be a great chance for him to be promoted and rich in the future. Li Meng was calculating in his heart and felt that this was a profitable business. He immediately raised his spirits and transferred 500 people from the Yamen on the same day. After receiving the news that Li Meng had transferred people, the resentment that Su Yanmo had been suppressing for the past few days was finally appeased. She thought insidiously that this time, even if she could not take that little bastard's life, she would smash Profound Heaven's hideout into smithereens. Noon. The sun was shining brightly. Cicadas chirped continuously. The White Academy also gave the students 2 days off because it was too hot. Tu Sufeng did not mention the real reason, but Hellion Vivian knew that it was because the academy was not as peaceful as before. She was now part of the battle spirit forces and her daily mission was to secretly search for the existence of demons in the academy. It seemed that Murong Hongtu's possession was very important to Tu Sufeng. However, Hellion Vivian felt that Tu Sufeng seemed to be more worried about what would happen in the academy. It was probably because Beligaju and Little Seven were here. War Dragon Empire's 2 most outstanding princes, and one of them was the heir apparent appointed by the retired emperor. Therefore, the search on the academy's side naturally became stricter. As usual, Hellion Vivian was in the same group as Little Seven. Little Baldy was very serious when he did his work. He had a tiger's head and tiger's face as he held a wooden stick and inspected every corner of the academy. He was very dedicated to his work. Of course, the prerequisite was that he couldn't scavenge all the food in every place he went. Are you full? Hellion Vivian asked him with a smile. Little Baldy rubbed his little belly and said seriously, that meal just now didn't taste good. Are you talking about the lotus leaf rice that you snatched from the headmaster? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. The little one nodded, his brows furrowed like a little caterpillar. It was probably because he had eaten something bad that made him feel that the world was not a good place anymore. Hellion Vivian looked at his expression and smiled. If it's not delicious, why did you finish it all? The headmaster said that we can't waste food. The little one straightened the wooden stick in his hand, looking very mighty and domineering. Hellion Vivian glanced at the little one. She didn't understand where the food he usually ate went. Then she looked at the direction of the sun and gently jumped down from the shade of the white flower tree. Then she tidied up her clothes and said, I'm going somewhere. Don't run around and go straight to the dean, okay? Third sister-in-law, are you going to look for third brother? Little Baldy took a bite of the meat bun he stole and his cheeks puffed up. Hellion Vivian said, no, I'm going out of the city to do something. Then I'll go with the 3 ships. The little one continued to puff up his cheeks, but his tone was very serious. Third brother said that I should protect you when he's not around. Hellion Weiwei was speechless. Since when did she have to be protected by a 4-year-old child? However, it was good to bring little Chi along. He could help her carry some things. Helly and Vivian seemed to have thought of something and smiled. Are you going to practice martial arts later? Yes. The little one paced forward with a dignified look. I can practice martial arts with you. Helly and Vivian felt that she shouldn't bully a child, so she told him what she wanted to ask for his help later. When we get to that place, help me carry some things just like how the headmaster asked you to carry stones to practice martial arts. Then I'll treat you to some spiced beef. What do you think? Spiced beef. The little one's 2 canine teeth immediately lit up. However, third brother said that as a man, a successful man must be expressionless. Especially for a successful man, he must be able to conceal his emotions without showing his emotions. Therefore he must control himself. Yes, he must control himself. The little one clenched his fists and tried hard to suppress the corners of his mouth. Finally, he turned his head and asked Helly and Vivian, third sister-in-law, can I have one more meat bun? Yes, you can have 3. The more Helly and Vivian looked at the little one in front of her, the cuter she found him. Especially when he had to pretend to be cool even though he wanted to eat it. Little did he know that his twitching little ears had betrayed him. She wondered if His Highness was also like this when he was young. However, little Chi's little handsome face was really handsome, especially when he exuded a punk vibe that said, I'm not to be trifled with. I'll beat up anyone who talks to me. It was such a contrast. Just like that, Helly and Vivian carried the little one and went out of the city in a carriage. The stronghold was set there because it was closer to the hidden army. However, no one knew about this. The retired emperor ordered her to make this batch of weapons in a hurry. During the rush period, it was requested to be as secretive as possible. Now that the weapons were made, the hidden army only needed the heavy machine guns. However, they were almost done. Helly and Vivian went there this time mainly to adjust the performance of the heavy machine guns. Another hour passed. In front of her was a huge courtyard surrounded by a brick wall. Standing outside the courtyard, she could hear the sound of metal clashing inside. This time, Helly and Wei Wei used the most experienced master craftsmen in the capital. Don't be fooled by their age, their craftsmanship was very good. When the craftsmen saw that Helly and Vivian had brought a little one, they were very happy. They touched him and looked at him. Little 7th Prince had always been cold, but he never rejected the kindness. He ate whatever was given to him. After a while, he went to help the craftsmen move the things. At first, the craftsmen were afraid that he would hit his hand. However, when they turned around, they saw the little one carrying a stack of spears on his shoulder. A stack. The craftsmen were collectively stunned. They rubbed their eyes. Then they saw the little one squatting down and carrying another stack of spears. There must be something wrong with their eyes today. Just as they were thinking about this, they suddenly heard a commotion outside. It sounded like many people had suddenly barged in. With a bang, the wooden door was pushed open. Chapter 362. The craftsmen had no idea what was going on. They put down their tools and looked behind them in shock. Li Meng had barged in with the people from the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs. Everyone who was forging in the courtyard was captured and squatted in a corner. They would not have known if they had not captured them, but they had captured more than 20 workers. Li Meng looked at the scene in the courtyard excitedly. There were swords and steel everywhere. The people inside seemed to be loading carts as if they were going to transport these weapons somewhere. The evidence was irrefutable. Just like what Madame Su said, even if Helly and Vivian had the third prince's support, the other party would not dare to say anything. How could a person like third prince, for the sake of Wei Wei, bear the crime of plotting a rebellion? When the time came, he would definitely not interfere. As long as the third prince did not interfere, there was nothing that he could not do. Put all these people in jail. Li Meng commanded proudly. He let the people from the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs control the craftsmen and led a group of guards into the courtyard. They took out all the weapons and piled them up in the courtyard. In a short while they had piled up into a small hill. This made him even more certain that he had caught Helly and Vivian's weakness. They had only searched one room and they had found so many weapons. If they searched all the rooms in the backyard, who knew how many more things they would find? Li Meng guessed in his heart that if this was not a rebellion, then what was it? He snorted and threw back the sword in his hand. He said disdainfully, "Confiscate all of them." Li Meng led his men to the backyard. The commotion grew bigger and bigger. Soon they found the courtyard where the little seventh prince was staying. The little bald head was practicing seriously. When he saw the soldiers suddenly barging in, his big tiger eyes narrowed into a straight line, revealing an unprecedented sense of danger. Li Meng was only a small official in the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs. He did not know the little seventh prince at all. Even Su Yenimo had only seen the little bald head's back at the wedding, let alone him. Everyone knew that the retired emperor doted on his two grandsons the most. The older one was the third prince and the younger one was ranked seventh. They were not to be trifled with. In Nangong Li's words, it was like a little tiger that would bite anyone it caught. Whether it was inside or outside the imperial palace, no one had ever dared to provoke the young king of hell. He was different from the third prince. After all, the third prince was already in charge of some matters in the imperial court. Before doing anything, he had to see if this matter was beneficial to the retired emperor. As for the little seventh prince, he was a typical example of biting to death whoever provoked him. After he was done, the retired emperor could not bear to punish such a young grandson, so he was punished to face the wall and reflect on his mistakes. Every time the little seventh prince reflected on his mistakes, his means of revenge would become even more vicious. That was why all the high-ranking ministers, such as Helian Guangyao and Prime Minister Su, had to avoid the little seventh prince whenever they saw him. Li Meng did not know about these things. He glanced at the little one's dirty robes and bald head. Instinctively he thought that he was just a poor kid brought in by some master. He did not take little seven seriously at all. However, little seven was born in the imperial family. When he encountered such a situation, his whole body immediately showed his nobility. "Who allowed you to come in? Get out." It was just a few simple words, but it made people feel oppressed. This prompted Li Meng to look at little seven and snorted disdainfully. "Little country bumpkin, move away." As he spoke, he wanted to reach out and push him away. Although Master Wang, who was standing at the side, did not know what little seven was, he was brought in by the princess consort, so he must be very precious. In addition, this group of masters really liked little seven, so he immediately stood in front of little seven and calmly looked at Li Meng. "Sir, if there's anything, we can talk about it properly. How can you just come in and grab people and steal things?" Li Meng sneered. "You know very well what this courtyard is for. Mass production of weapons. Do you know that this is a crime? If you know what's good for you, move away. Otherwise I'll kill you right now." Master Wang's face turned pale. He hugged little seven and stood aside. He was really worried that the swords had no eyes and would hurt the people brought by the princess consort. He had been in Wei Zhe world for so many days and had seen many officials, but he had never seen one like this. He was so angry that he could not speak. Little seven's little face completely darkened. He lowered his head and did not know what to do. The masters all protected little seven and did not let the soldiers touch the child. At this moment they only hoped that the child would be fine. Everything else could be done again. The princess consort was still at the back of the mountain discussing official business. Someone had already gone to report. They believed that as long as the princess consort was here, this group of people would all be finished. "Sir, we found a cave in the back of the courtyard. It seems to be the warehouse where they hide the weapons. Should we go?" Li Meng was excited when he heard this. He got up and was about to go over. Master Wang still remembered that the princess consort had ordered that no one was to go to the cave in the back of the mountain, so he desperately blocked Li Meng's way. Li Meng kicked Master Wang to the ground, snatched the blacksmithing tools from his hands and threw them to the ground. He said fiercely, "You still dare to block me, huh? You want to take advantage of the loophole to make money? Let me tell you, there's no way. No matter who you work for, no matter how powerful your background is, I will still catch you. Who asked you to provoke someone you shouldn't provoke and make such a batch of weapons? I want to know if I've offended someone I shouldn't have." In the midst of the commotion, Helian Wei very slowly walked out from the backyard. Her pair of eyes carried a chilling coldness that made people tremble. Her long sleeves were like wings as she lightly floated in mid-air. Her eyes swept over the surrounding environment. Steel was thrown everywhere and Master Wang was clutching his lower abdomen. As well as little seven, whose eyes had turned red and whose little fists were clenched so tightly that creaking sounds could be heard. When he stepped back just now, little seven's clothes were dirty. His originally handsome face now looked like he had been wronged. Helian Vivian's face immediately darkened. She took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in her heart, but her eyes were colder than ever. Standing beside Hellion Vivian was De Xiong of the Hidden Army. Seeing that his young master's courtyard was smashed, his eyes widened. He bent down and whispered in Hellion Vivian's ear, "Young master, I will go back now and bring a few brothers to beat this bunch of ignorant people to death." "No need." Hellion Vivian's thin lips curled up, and she was full of murderous intent. "This place is so secretive, but someone still followed the vine to find the melon. Obviously someone doesn't like me. I don't believe that a small rank 5 from the Ministry of Personnel would have such guts. There must be someone behind him. Had they dared to bully people in my Hellion Weiwei's territory? Didn't they want to make a scene? Then let's make it bigger. I want to drag all of them out. Let him search." Chapter 363. De Xiong was confused, but he couldn't help but admire his young master's oppressive aura. Li Meng had never seen Hellion Vivian before. He had only heard of her reputation in the capital. Now that he had seen her, he was even more certain of his conjecture. How could such a dark woman be compared to his fairy-like cousin? She was just an ugly woman. Without hesitation he met Hellion Vivian's gaze. With a mocking smile he said, "Third Princess Consort, don't blame this official for being rude. This official was ordered to investigate this case. I advise Third Princess Consort to be tactful. These weapons are evidence of your crimes." Hellion Vivian sneered in her heart. She didn't say anything but reached out to stop Shao Qi. Li Meng saw that she didn't say anything and thought that she was guilty. His expression became even more smug. He waved his hand and said, "Come, put these people in chains and bring them back to the yamen." "Yes." 2 soldiers answered. They wanted to go forward and pull the little one up. Shao Qi's expression was cold. He waved the wooden stick in his hand but he didn't hit anyone. Those officers who wanted to get close to him were forced to take a step back. Their internal organs were in unbearable pain. In an instant the 2 soldiers' expressions changed. They lay on the ground, cold sweat pouring down their foreheads. "Get more people here. You can't even deal with a child. You're really useless," Li Meng said fiercely. He didn't believe that this poor child could be so powerful. He would kill him with one stab. That soldier adjusted his official cap and hurriedly replied, "Yes." "Wait." Hellion Vivian smiled at this moment. Her evil aura was cold. "No need to call for more people. We'll follow you to the yamen." For a moment, everyone wondered if there was something wrong with their ears. What was the Princess Consort thinking? De Xiong didn't understand either. His mouth was wide open. If he saw their young master being taken away, he would be laughed at by his brothers. But there were only a few hundred Lulu. He could beat them all by himself. Was it his imagination? Why did he feel that the young master was deliberately going along with the other party today? No one could understand why Hellion Vivian would do such a thing. But the little 7th prince who was born in the palace knew clearly. If he went to prison and his imperial grandfather found out, none of these people would be able to escape. Grandpa Emperor might not be so angry after a few simple checks. But if the commotion was too big, then it would be a different story. Humph. She dared to disturb his training and bully 3rd sister-in-law. See if 3rd brother doesn't skin these people alive when he comes. However, he did not know if there was any food in the prison. He was so angry with these people that he was hungry. It was very unlucky. As little 7 thought about it, he put away the wooden stick in his hand and stood behind Hellion Vivian with a solemn expression. That kind of aura made the soldiers tremble when they put the handcuffs on him. How was this a child? This was clearly a tiger. It was as if it could bite him if he wasn't careful. Why did officially let them catch this kind of child? The soldiers were suffering unspeakably, but Li Ji did not know anything. From the beginning he thought that little 7 was just a wild child in this village. No matter how powerful he was, he only knew some martial arts. How could he think of the royal family? However, the moment he brought little 7 back to the yamen, Baligaju received the news. Shadow knelt on one knee in the palace and told him about how the little 7th prince was bullied. Nangong Lai laughed. Little 7 can be bullied? Which blind fool did that? Baligaju put down the letters in his hand and said slowly, "Who bullied him? Let little 7 take his life." And the 3rd Princess Consort. Shadow thought for a while and told him everything in detail, including the incident where Hellion Weiwei was taken away. He watched as his master's face slowly darkened and in the end his voice went silent. Bailey Jiaju still maintained his previous sitting posture, indolent yet noble. Only that pair of eyes that were as indifferent as ice suddenly soared with a touch of stifling depth. Then there was a cracking sound. The luminous pearl on the desk cracked into a deep crack. And Ing suddenly held his breath. He knew that this time His Highness was really angry. Baligaju stood up, his eyes were like ice pools. The usual elegance had now turned into the most frightening evil aura. It was a cold smile that made people shiver from the bottom of their hearts, as if it could seep into the bones of others. Go and investigate. No matter who they are, as long as they are related to this matter, bring them all to me. Shadow respectfully answered and immediately left. This time, the person who made a move on the Princess Consort had touched his master's reverse scale. The other party was indeed a fool. Of all people to arrest, they just had to arrest the Princess Consort and the little seventh prince together. Even if the third prince didn't say anything, the retired emperor would probably feel very distressed. Baligaju had always been ruthless, but he didn't think that there was anyone who could really deal with Hellion Vivian. After thinking about it for a while, he understood what was going on. He then ordered the servant beside him to send the news directly to the retired emperor. Nangong Lai followed beside him with an evil smile. This is really a beautiful plan. Her making weapons was ordered by Imperial Grandfather, and I was also involved. Baligaju's few words were enough to show that the person who made trouble this time was simply courting death. Clang. The iron door made a hollow and long sound. In the gloomy dungeon, Hellion Vivian and the little seventh prince were locked in the same cell. Li Meng looked at them complacently, then ordered 2 jailers to keep a close watch on them and wait for him to come back for interrogation. The little seventh prince snorted twice. When third brother comes, he will definitely be dead. Yes. Hellion Vivian laughed. That man definitely wouldn't allow anyone to bully the little seventh prince. Previously, when he saw someone badmouth the little seventh prince, his eyes could kill. The little bald head rubbed his stomach and was still a little indignant. Master Wang originally said that he would make preserved vegetables and meat for me to eat, but in the end there is nothing. You helped third sister-in-law do a lot of things today. When we go out later, third sister-in-law will take you to the VIP restaurant to eat. Hellion Vivian picked up the little one and wiped the dirt on his face. The little bald head tilted his face. Third sister-in-law, don't wipe it. If you wipe it, Imperial Grandfather won't see me as pitiful. He will definitely think that I am the one who hit others and not the other way around. I usually like to hit people too much. Hellion Vivian. You also know that you are famous for loving to fight. As the two of them were talking, a light suddenly lit up in the dark prison cell. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of footsteps coming from afar was extremely messy, enough to tell that the person who came was very anxious. Quickly open the cell for me. Chapter 364. It was official Li who was in charge of the entire Ministry of Appointments. Right now he couldn't find any of his usual high status and authority. He was constantly wiping the sweat on his forehead with a handkerchief. The jailers didn't know why official Li was so anxious. They could only lower their heads and quickly unlock the iron lock. Official Li hurriedly entered the prison cell and bowed deeply to the two people who were still chatting. This humble official didn't recognize Mount Tai and offended the two of you. Now that the misunderstanding has been resolved, the two of you can leave the prison. Hellion Vivian smiled but didn't say anything. Little Seven nestled in Hellion Vivian's arms and didn't have any intention of moving. It seemed that he had made up his mind that if his imperial grandfather didn't come personally, he wouldn't leave this prison cell today. Official Li saw that the two of them didn't move and became even more anxious. His legs couldn't help but start to tremble. He looked at Hellion Vivian with a pleading gaze. Miss Hellion, no, Princess Consort, this matter really has nothing to do with this humble official. This humble official also doesn't know why the people below were so blind and captured the two of you. Please help this humble official persuade the seventh prince? I thought official Li didn't know who Little Seven and I were. The moment you came in you called us too. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Official Li was speechless. He anxiously paced back and forth like a headless fly. He was so anxious that he was about to cry. At this moment, a clear announcement came from outside the prison cell. The retired emperor has arrived. A bright yellow figure walked over from afar. His steps were steady and dignified, revealing a noble and graceful aura. Official Li's expression changed. He pressed his head and quickly kowtowed. He shouted, "This humble official respectfully welcomes the Emperor's arrival. Long live the Emperor." Eunuch's son, who was beside the retired Emperor, didn't even look at him and directly walked past. The retired Emperor, who was such a person who cared about his appearance, walked away with messy hair. He lowered his head and saw that his precious grandson's face was black and his arm seemed to be scraped. This was simply like stabbing his heart with a knife. Eunuch's son immediately cried out in pain. His eyes immediately filled with tears. Who exactly is this person who doesn't want to live? Seventh Prince, where does your body hurt? Just tell this old servant, huh? Look at what those people did. In any case, they were still in the capital. If they were caught and beaten in a more remote place, wouldn't they have killed someone? The seventh prince is still a child, how could they do that? Little Baldy pouted and raised his head to look at the retired emperor. Imperial grandfather, I didn't hit anyone this time. I was just practicing martial arts with third sister-in-law. That group of people rushed in and said that third sister-in-law and I had offended someone we shouldn't have. The retired emperor's face was ashen. He wished he could drag all of them down and behead them. He reached out and carried the little one over. He patted Shao-Chi's back and roared at official Li, who was kneeling behind him. Who is the one who captured him? Investigate immediately. If you can't find out, I'll kill you directly. Mr. Li was so scared that he trembled and immediately rushed out. When he rushed to the door, he saw Beligaju walking in. Third royal family. Official Li curled his fingers and instinctively wanted to run away. Bailey Jiaju slowly walked over. His peach blossom eyes seemed to be sprinkled with ice dregs, so cold that it couldn't help but cause a chill to surface. It was still that spirited and handsome face, but the expression was so sinister and malicious. The depths of his eyes were even more indifferent. Move quickly, the side effects must be small. Don't scare the snake and don't think about catching a scapegoat. If this highness finds out that you've communicated with someone, your Li family's 138 people can forget about living, understand? When official Li heard this, he knew that there was something behind this matter. The royal family wanted to investigate thoroughly. He immediately wiped away his cold sweat and hurriedly said, I understand, this official understands. How would this official dare to leak information to others? Your Highness, rest assured, this official will definitely handle this matter well. However, he really didn't know who did this. Which unlucky bastard did this and left him to clean up this mess that couldn't be cleaned up? Imperial grandfather, fortunately, third sister-in-law is here. In the prison cell, little bald head covered his small face and was full of tiger spirit. If it wasn't for third sister-in-law, I would have been bullied badly. Nangong Lai came in behind Beligaju. When he heard the little one's words, his expression couldn't help but be a little twisted. He looked sideways and asked Beligaju, who was standing at the side, Do you believe that this little brat will be bullied? Why not? Beligaju looked at him indifferently and said slowly, My seventh brother is still a child. Nangong Lai. Yes, that's right, little Seven is indeed a child. But this child can fight magical beasts with his bare hands. In this world, except for you, the royal family, who can bully him? You are indeed brothers. Nangong Lai smiled evilly. They were all black-hearted people who ate people without spitting out the bones. He still admired the person who dared to pluck the fur from the tiger. He really didn't know anything about life and death. The older the retired emperor was, the more he loved his grandson. This group of people knew that the third prince had a cold personality since he was young. No matter how close the retired emperor was, he had a limit. But the little seventh prince was different. Except for his love of beating people, he was basically a good-natured boy. If the retired emperor wasn't afraid that he would be framed in the palace, he wouldn't be willing to send him to the White Academy to raise him. She had been well taken care of and had never suffered a single grievance. Suddenly she was caught and thrown into prison. It would be strange if the retired emperor wasn't angry. Besides, this batch of weapons was secretly made by Hellion Vivian. Yesterday he just received the news that it was almost completed. Today he heard the news that someone was caught. Who the hell is so daring? The retired emperor turned his head and said to Beligaju, Aju, go and investigate. Whoever you find, arrest him for me. Don't be considerate. Bailey Jiaju's voice was faint as he hummed in agreement, but his eyes were on Hellion Wei Wei's body. After confirming that she did not have any wounds, that pair of eyes could be considered to be much gentler. Come over. Hellion Vivian naturally wouldn't reject him in front of the retired emperor. Moreover, the retired emperor had appeared right after she and little seventh prince were locked in prison. This man must have some tricks up his sleeve. It seemed that she and his highness had a tacit understanding when it came to dealing with others. While the entire prison was set, Li Meng was proudly taking credit in the general's residence. Li Meng was rarely invited into the inner hall, but this time was an exception. Su Yenmo sent him to work this time to wait for his results. If he really found out something, that little bitch would never be able to make a comeback. Li Meng held a cup of good tea that he rarely drank and talked about what he had done today. His words were full of joy from helping Madame Su vent her anger. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.